Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Dear listeners, before we get started, drop a quick hi in the comments and let us know where you're tuning in from. Also, if you have any suggestions for us to make the channel better, please let us know. Now let's start with the story. My mom was an Air Force brat. Her father narrowly escaped arrest for something awful, something that still haunts her today. That's not an excuse for what she put us through, though. She married a Navy guy and had my brother Daniel. I came along a little over a year later. Our childhood, a textbook case of being raised by a narcissist. But that's a whole separate pile of trauma for another time. For now, let's talk about how she made both me and my brother quit 2 different jobs within the same month. At the time, I was in community college with no car, so I relied on the bus to get around. The public transit system wasn't great, but for $30 a month, I had unlimited rides, more than worth it after just 4 round trips to school. Daniel worked at a popular grocery store and got his preferred job, cart retrieval. He loved it, no customer service headaches, just peace in carts. The store also liked that he wasn't shy about chasing off the bums who tried to steal carts, which are surprisingly expensive to replace. His commute was 45 minutes each way. He worked part-time at minimum wage. I, on the other hand, worked for the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, specifically at the Southwest Fisheries Branch. They often hired student workers from UC, but I got in through my community college. I worked in the historical fish collection department, handling labeling, cataloging, and organizing samples used to track fish health and support decisions by the Fish and Game Department. I loved the job. I loved my boss. I ignored the UC students who looked down on me. From school to work, it took me 45 minutes by bus. I worked 5 to 5.5 hours a day at $11 per hour, slightly above minimum wage. Then I had another 45-minute ride home. But somehow, this steady, meaningful work wasn't good enough for our mom. For 3 months straight, she whined nonstop, complaining about how long it took us to get to and from work. Wouldn't it be better to find something closer to home? She'd ask over and over. Now, maybe that made sense for Daniel, but the truth is, that grocery store was the only location hiring. And if you've ever used public transit, you know delays happen. Traffic, driver shifts, and general unpredictability meant that sometimes our rides home stretched into an hour or even longer. Still, Daniel and I were always early to our shifts and clocked in right on time. Yet every time we were late getting home, she'd accuse us of ignoring the bus, playing games, or listening to music too loud, like that was the problem, that every time she asked why we were home late. One day, both my brother and I explained that the bus didn't show up on time, and no, it wasn't because we were playing Game Boy. That excuse was met with a cold look and a scolding, as if we were just making things up instead of being responsible enough to ask questions about the delay. Finally, I'd had enough. I secretly recorded one of her rants about how long our commutes were and played it for my boss. She already knew my mom from years ago. They had both been involved in a local service unit organizing Girl Scout programs for younger girls. My boss believed me completely. Even though it wasn't standard practice, the department arranged a small farewell party for me, something usually reserved for the UC student interns when their semesters ended. It was lovely. I missed them all deeply once I left. I moped around my room miserably, waiting for my final paycheck to arrive. I had only been at that job for 7 months. Then Mom had the nerve to ask, "What made you decide to quit?" As if she hadn't been the reason. I told her bluntly, "Because I'm tired of you constantly whining about how long it takes to get to work." Daniel loved his job, but standing on pavement for 6 hours a day wore him down. He regularly bought new insoles to help reduce the strain and pain. Still, he was often in low-grade discomfort. Just 2 weeks after I left my job, Daniel quit too. Mom couldn't have been more thrilled. She went on and on about how nice it would be to have him home and not irritable from physical strain. But then she started questioning why he hadn't asked to transfer to the store that was only a 7-minute walk away. His answer mirrored mine, "Because I'm tired of you bitching about how long it takes to get to and from work." Our dad believed us both. He said he understood Mom was being unreasonable. Mom hasn't held a paid job since 1997, and for years, she routinely sabotaged any job my brother or I managed to get just so we'd stay home. Then she'd turn around and complain that we weren't working. She preached about how important it was to show up to work on time, but whenever we accepted her offers to drive us, she'd leave late, making us late, too. My entitled mother stole from us for years. More backstory. My brother and I both have ADHD. He also has OCD, and I'm visually impaired. Our dad was in the military and gone most of the time, so we were left with Mom, a controlling neat freak who, while occasionally capable of being a decent parent, certainly wasn't one often enough. If she were, I wouldn't be writing this story. When I was very young, I had a comfort item, not a blanket or piece of clothing, but a stuffed horse. I adored it. When I couldn't take it with me outside, I'd leave it on my pillow and curl up with it at night. I'd had it for years by the time I was in second grade, so it had definitely seen better days. The inserts in its hose had nearly all fallen out. Its once white coat had dulled, and the yarn of its mane and tail had started to fray from being braided and unbraided so much. I was deep into my horse/pony phase, surrounded by merchandise from a popular franchise. Even my bed sheets and blankets matched. As a kid with challenges, my room was never perfectly clean. I usually had a few toys outside the bin, some clothes here and there that I'd missed during cleanup, and my favorite jacket lying on top of my bed since I used it everyday normal stuff for a kid that age. But to my mom, you'd think my room had turned into a trailer park horror story, wall-to-wall garbage and filth, judging by how she reacted. And her solution? Just as extreme. One day, as I was walking home after being dropped off by the school bus, I saw her loading brown paper bags into the trunk of her car. That struck me as odd. Groceries going to the house, not the other way around. When I asked her about it, she just gave me a curt, "Clean up your room," then closed the trunk and drove off. Figuring it was just the usual, maybe some socks or scattered toys she was mad about, I went inside. But when I reached my bedroom, I stopped cold in the doorway. It looked like a tornado had hit. Every single drawer from my dresser had been pulled out, their contents dumped all over my bed and the floor. Some drawers weren't even in the room anymore. They were tossed to the far side of the bed. My books, my clothes, my toys, everything was scattered. The only thing left untouched was my bed, still perfectly made. This definitely wasn't how I left it that morning. Confused, I checked to see if my brother was home yet. I knocked on his door, walked in, and his room looked the same. Only instead of ponies and Barbies, his floor was covered in Tonka trucks and Ninja Turtles. When Daniel finally got home, Mom still hadn't returned. He flipped out when he saw his room and stormed into mine, accusing me of trashing his stuff. But when he saw me crying, frantically trying to clean up the mess in my own room, he stopped. I told him Mom wanted us to clean up the mess. At that age, we were both terrified of her. She was a slap-happy tyrant, and she had thoroughly convinced us that Dad worked too hard to come home to lazy, ungrateful kids. So we scrambled, hoping to get our rooms cleaned, if not before Mom got back, then definitely before Dad came home from the naval base. Funny thing, I don't even remember why we were so scared of Dad's countdown punishments, but we never let them hit 0. Mom, on the other hand, hit us regularly whether we deserved it or not. We eventually managed to get our rooms back in order, still completely clueless about what had actually happened. That night, I started picking through my room again, specifically looking for my plush horse, my comfort toy, but I couldn't find it. I didn't even remember seeing it during cleanup. So I did the logical thing and asked Mom if she'd seen it. Her response was cold and dismissive. "Oh, I donated that old thing. You didn't need it anymore." I was in first or second grade. I was still young enough to need a security item, and my mother decided, without warning, that it was time to get rid of it, completely ignoring my feelings. Later, I asked Daniel if he noticed anything missing from his room. The next morning, he confirmed that yes, some of his stuff was gone too. I know what you're thinking, this sounds like typical strict parent behavior, but this was just the beginning. She did things like this often enough that I eventually learned to recognize the specific sounds of the mornings when she was most likely to rip our rooms apart. I became especially afraid she'd take my piggy bank, so I got really good at quietly emptying it without making a sound. It wasn't anything fancy, just a makeshift piggy bank made out of a milk jug by a family member, where I kept all my spare change. I'd dump the coins into a cheap denim purse, then stuff it with socks to keep the clinking down. I'd hide it at the very bottom of my backpack, piling all my school supplies on top. That made my backpack way heavier than it needed to be, and as a result, I became a surprisingly strong elementary school kid from carrying it around so often. Honestly, it's a wonder I didn't stunt my growth or mess up my spine. $7 in coins, pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters adds up and wait fast. One particularly bad morning, I accidentally pulled the plastic coat rack out of my closet wall. I couldn't just stick it back on since I'd torn the drywall anchor clean out. So I stashed it in the bottom of my closet, intending to ask Dad to fix it later. School went as usual that day, but when I got home, I saw those dreaded brown paper bags by the front door, and sitting on top of one of them was my coat rack. I knew what that meant. Not this time. I dug into the bag, retrieved the coat rack, and made my way to my room. That's when I found Mom in the middle of tearing up Daniel's room again. She spotted me with the coat rack and immediately zeroed in. "What do you think you're doing with that? That's garbage you left on the floor, give it here." I tried to stay calm and mostly told the truth. I explained that I'd knocked it down while reaching for some costume jewelry that I had hanging from it, including my denim purse. I told her I was going to ask Dad to help me hang it back up. She lost it. She snapped the coat rack in two and hurled the pieces at my head. "Fine. Keep them. Good luck getting your dad to do anything with it." That wasn't the first time she'd stolen from us and pretended it was garbage she was donating. But it was the most memorable because this time, I had tried to reclaim something before she could take it. By now, she'd already trashed my dresser drawers, and I had to stack them on top of Dad's wardrobe just to keep things somewhat functional. Of course, she told him it was my fault that I was careless with my furniture, never once admitting she was the one who caused the damage. I'd already started crying to teachers, to anyone who would listen, but nothing ever came of it. I was still a minor, and that meant I had to follow my mom's orders even when she was clearly in the wrong, even when she was stealing from me. That day, I made it my mission to make her life miserable. I was determined to find a way to get Child Protective Services involved. This needed to come to light. She couldn't be allowed to keep getting away with it. And yes, even in the 3rd grade, I was already starting to see my mom as a monster. Because who else would treat their children like this? The 3rd time I remember clearly was in the 4th grade. That time, I caught her in the act right in the middle of tearing my room apart. I stood in the doorway, all the height and fury a kid my age could muster, glaring daggers at the wicked witch who was trying to take my piggy bank, the one my Uncle Jerry, who had Alzheimer's, made just for me. What do you think you're doing? That's my bank made for me by Uncle Jerry. You put that back right now. I even mimicked her voice and toned her exact inflections. She looked up, surprised. Partly because I'd spoken to her the way she usually spoke to us, and partly because she hadn't realized I'd come home early. Daniel was home too, watching the whole thing unfold from his room. I could almost hear him buzzing with glee, thrilled to see her finally being talked to the way she treated others. But it didn't last. She stuttered for a moment, then stormed out of the room only to return with a pair of scissors. She shoved me hard against the doorframe. My glasses broke, and I landed on the floor. What came next was unforgivable. She took those scissors and made 3 long, ragged cuts in my piggy bank. From the coin slot halfway down the right side, from the snout to the belly, and again from the coin slot to the tail. She even tried to cut through the lid, but when that didn't work, she twisted the body until it cracked, then threw the ruined remains at my head. She stormed out of my room with whatever else she'd managed to steal. I tried patching the bank up with packing tape. I held on to it for another month before she eventually threw it away for good. Her excuse? We weren't using it. I'd gotten so good at quietly emptying the coins that she genuinely thought it was just an empty decoration taking up space on my shelf. This kind of thing went on throughout elementary school. But eventually, she seemed to get bored, or maybe I'd pushed her into a new level of psychological cruelty. After 5th grade, she added a new twist. Each morning, before we left for school, she'd tell us to go through our rooms and gather items for her to donate. If we didn't, she warned, she'd go through our things herself while we were gone. It was a constant, looming threat. As if we weren't already terrified of her at home, now we had to fear what we'd lose while we were at school, too. And to make matters worse, the school district had actually hired her, so she was around there, too. There was truly no escape. I honestly don't know how long this lasted. It became so routine that I lost track. But sometime during my junior year of high school, while sitting at lunch, I had one of those sudden, strange moments of clarity, and I realized it hadn't happened in a while. I wasn't about to ask her why. That same day, I reread my old diary. I used to write in it every time she tore my room apart. But by late middle school, I'd stopped mostly because I'd lost the key for a while. That year, I finally shared these stories with Dad. I really thought he already knew. They divorced last year. And when I told him everything in detail, I saw it on his face. The shock, the pain, and the horror. What happened right under my dad's nose, what my brother and I were convinced or manipulated into hiding from him, is something I'll probably never fully understand. I'll never receive any kind of compensation for the damage my mother caused, and I'll likely never understand what made her believe we deserved the kind of treatment she gave us. She stole from us regularly, almost ritualistically, under the guise of cleaning. And because she was our parent, she got away with it. No one stepped in. No one stood up for the kids she was emotionally and mentally abusing. Even now, I still struggle with letting go of material things. But I'm getting better. And yes, I called CPS on her more than once. But every time, they left without taking any action. Nothing ever changed. A narcissistic grandmother alienates her family to the point of denying her own husband a funeral. This isn't about my own parents anymore, but rather, one of my mother's parents. Her mother. My maternal grandmother. To sum it up, my mom is an incredibly sweet, outgoing, and energetic woman. If I had to name one negative thing about her, it would be her hyperactivity, which is partly caused by a medical condition. I won't name it here to protect some level of privacy, but it's a serious autoimmune disease that's caused her significant pain throughout her life, so severe that it almost killed her when she gave birth to me, and nearly did again when she was just 6 years old. The condition is inherited from both her parents. Her father, my grandfather, managed the condition well, even though it wasn't well understood back when my mom was a child. He was a sociable and caring man who would do anything to help. But her mother, my grandmother, was the complete opposite. From the stories my mother has shared, it's clear that her mom was a narcissist deeply invested in appearances and obsessed with controlling how others saw her, all while talking behind people's backs. I get the sense that she wanted the image of having children, but didn't actually want to be a mother, especially not if it meant the attention would shift away from her. Many of the stories hint at an almost disturbing jealousy toward her own kids. She seemed especially bitter whenever my grandfather showed affection or attention to my mother or uncle, things any normal, decent parent would do. And she would even encourage or allow things that could have seriously hurt them, though thankfully those situations never escalated. But out of all the stories my mother told me, especially about the times she was sick, even when she was literally dying before she turned 10, her mother always managed to be worse. Now here's where I came into the picture and started interacting with this woman myself. When I was younger, I had issues with male figures thanks to my own father, so I was naturally drawn to my grandmother's overly sweet demeanor. I didn't trust my grandfather at first, but as I grew older, I started to see through the mask. Some of the most striking red flags were the way she tried to baby me aggressively, so as if I were still 5 years old. She'd make comments like "you didn't stay little," or take little jabs that hinted at her resentment over getting older or her failing health. Keep in mind, this woman had the same medical condition as my mother. But while my mom stayed active, took care of herself, and never let her illness slow her down, my grandmother did the opposite. She chain smoked, ate horribly, never exercised, and steadily made her condition worse. And yet, somehow, she always painted herself as the victim. We were expected to feel sorry for her. Over time, I began hearing stories about how my grandparents supposedly helped their kids go to university. That turned out to be a lie confirmed by both my uncle, my mom's brother, and my grandfather. Sure, they sent a little money here and there, but nothing substantial. My mom and uncle both worked incredibly hard to put themselves through school. The weirdest part? For years, my mom and her brother each believed that their parents had helped the other get through university. That's how deep the manipulation went. Eventually, the truth came out, and I later found out that the entire myth originated from my grandmother herself boasting to anyone who would listen, likely to boost her image and seem like a supportive parent. If you read my last post, you'll know my mother eventually had a great job. Money wasn't a huge issue for her. She was also a successful artist, with her work being well received at local shows. Her social nature made her popular, and her talent spoke for itself. But despite all that, she once told me something that really stuck with me. In all her life, she had never heard her mother praise her, not once. So, being the curious and determined little kid I was, I decided to test this. One day, when my grandparents called, I ended up talking to my grandmother. I brought up my mother's successes, her talent, her accomplishments, giving my grandmother multiple chances to say something kind or supportive. Any normal parent or person would have said something positive, but she didn't. That moment really started to solidify the disgust I felt for her. The third major event that really made things clear came when we visited them in person. I had just left my dad about a year earlier, and my grandfather was kind and supportive as always. Meanwhile, my grandmother kept doing her usual poorly routine. Despite everything I'd gone through dealing with my father, being bullied at school, she somehow always made herself out to be the one suffering most. At the time, I had recently been assaulted by school bullies who had hung me by my necklaces from wall hooks, and even choked me. I was very small for my age and smaller than most of my peers, which only made me more vulnerable. As a result, I developed a deep fear of anything around my neck, especially people's hands or arms. I warned everyone, even family, that I might instinctively react if I felt threatened in that way. When we were about to leave, my grandparents wanted hugs, pretty normal. I warned my grandmother to be gentle and avoid my neck. But instead of respecting that, she pulled me into a hug that felt more like a headlock, wrapped tightly around my neck while baby talking me. I got anxious and gave her a first warning to let go, then a second, more serious one. If she didn't stop, I couldn't promise I wouldn't lash out. It took both my mother and grandfather physically prying her off me. I left shaken and needed to be comforted by my mom on the way home. We never saw them in person after that. The same patterns continued over the phone: the poorly tone, the manipulation. They even missed my mother's wedding to my stepdad because my grandmother intentionally ensured they wouldn't be able to go. She was so dependent on my grandfather that she forced him to stay home with her, even though he wanted to attend. Eventually, my grandfather developed dementia, and they both had to move into a care home. Strangely enough, my grandmother seemed thrilled, attention all on her again. That's when we started hearing about all the lies she'd been telling others over the years. The workers at the care home started painting me and my mother as ungrateful, accusing us of abandoning my grandparents. But the truth was far different. We simply couldn't deal with her anymore. Between limited time, our own personal struggles, and the cost of visiting, it It just wasn't worth subjecting ourselves to her increasing toxicity. No one in the family wanted to deal with her anymore. The funny part? She was telling the staff all sorts of tall tales about the lavish things she and Granddad supposedly paid for lessons, courses, sports activities, all of which were completely false. I actually laughed when I heard it, since one of those activities had been paid for by my dad when I still lived with him, not by my grandparents. It got so ridiculous that the staff at the home eventually contacted both my mom and uncle to confirm what was true. Even they admitted they had suspected her of lying, but wanted to hear it straight from us. From what we later learned through family and conversations with the staff, most of the workers despised having to deal with her at all. But the final straw, the one that completely severed any remaining connection, was what happened after Granddad passed away. Granddad was a kind, generous man who would do anything for others. Despite being married to someone like her, he genuinely loved her and stayed with her until the very end. Unfortunately, he was also easily manipulated by her. Because of that, no money was set aside for a funeral. And due to her toxic presence, no one wanted to attend one if she were going to be there. What made it worse was how we even found out about his death. We didn't get a call from her or the care home. Instead, my uncle learned through an old friend of Granddad's who had come to check in on him. At the time, Granddad had dementia and wasn't fully aware of things. But Grandmother, wanting to maintain her poor act, intentionally left out contact information for the rest of the family. No one was informed. She took her entitled, narcissistic behavior so far that she alienated her own children and the rest of the family. In doing so, she denied Granddad a proper funeral, a man who had more than earned that final respect. Even though she had the means to pay for one, she chose not to. She hoarded the money for herself instead. From the few updates we got from the staff at the home, we learned that Granddad was cremated, and his ashes were scattered along walking paths he used to frequent. In his honor, and in protest of the funeral he was never given, we planted a tree on our property, in the spot where he had once lived. It was our way of saying goodbye. Rest in peace, Granddad. Entitled Mom wants her time and hates being denied it. For as long as I can remember, Mom was always the first and final word on everything. If you question her logic using even her own words from earlier that day, you got punished. This applied especially to house rules, which were often contradictory or changed on a whim. I think part of her extreme reactions came from the fact that my brother Daniel, who, like Daniel Duck, could be annoying, useless, but occasionally awesome, and I were both smarter than average. We learned to follow the exact wording of her rules while completely bypassing their intended purpose. The rules, after all, weren't meant to guide or teach, they existed purely to give her more opportunities to steal from us or lash out. That kind of chaos started back in elementary school and never really stopped. We were going to be punished no matter what, so we figured why not bend the rules a little? This was back in the days of dial-up internet and those browser CDs that came in the mail. We finally got our first computer, which gave Mom a new form of control. We just wanted to play games, but she didn't want our schoolwork to suffer fair enough, so she set time limits for any non-school related computer use. Reasonable, right? Except we had to earn that screen time by doing chores, since she was bizarrely opposed to the idea of giving us an allowance. What she didn't tell us was that she could revoke that hard-earned time at any moment for any reason. But we found the sweet spot in her forgetfulness and managed to claw back every single second we earned, even if we had to sweat for it. Later, we got a PlayStation 1, and of course the screen time limits extended to that too. But now there was a twist. It was technically my brother's console. We each had our own time allotments, but I had to ask him for permission to play, and he never gave it. He was the golden child, Mom's clear favorite. Eventually, I had to go to Dad to get around that nonsense. Daniel would blow through all his gaming time the moment he got home from school, while I'd wait until I'd finished my homework. When I went to play and he refused to let me, Mom insisted I still had to ask him despite it being in the living room, which she kept under lockdown because she didn't trust anyone not to sneak game time. Dad backed me up, and it led to a screaming match at base housing over why their daughter had to ask permission from her younger brother to play on a console that wasn't even in his room. It was glorious. They fought a lot over stuff like that, but Mom usually won since Dad was active duty and away most of the time, and she was always home. Daniel and I coped with this nightmare in different ways. He became her yes man and brown-nosed for perks, while I took Dad's side, because even at that age I knew this was ridiculous and refused to accept it. This pattern continued into our college years. Mom still acted like she owned any time we spent with electronics. She even forbade us from getting cell phones, claiming we weren't responsible enough, when really, it was because she couldn't control what we did on them. She couldn't stop us from playing mobile games outside the house, and that drove her crazy. She even went so far as to try and keep us grounded on weekends, not because we had done anything wrong, but to stop us from going to friends' houses and possibly playing games there. At that point, her punishments weren't even punishments, they were desperate attempts to maintain control. Her frustration only grew as we kept exploiting her forgetfulness to reclaim our time. She hated whenever I involved Dad to hold Daniel accountable to the same rules, since he was just as entitled and rarely punished. The fights between our parents over her hypocrisy got so bad that the cops were called more than once, and eventually, counseling was recommended. To her credit, we did attend family therapy, but little changed except for the therapist telling her she was being unreasonable and would stress herself into an early grave if she didn't ease up. Why she never tried something as simple as a structured family rule list, I'll never know. Everyone in the family said the same thing: Mom changed everything at the drop of a hat whenever she got mad. So the idea was, if we had clearly written rules that everyone followed, maybe there'd be less fighting and complaining. Seemed logical, right? A month later, we got the result. Honestly, the rule chart looked more like something made for second graders than for college students. Still, it was a start. These were concrete rules that could only be changed if the majority of the family agreed. There were clearly defined rewards and punishments, and we took it seriously. Daniel and I grilled her for hours about every line. We needed to make sure we all fully understood what these new rules meant, and that her usual nonsense like randomly denying us computer or game time was explicitly not allowed. She whined about us making the introduction drag on longer than necessary, but she was slippery as a sea slug, and we weren't going to let anything slide without full clarification. We needed to understand exactly how this new system would work and how she was expected to follow it. The structure was simple, a daily list of chores. If you missed one, you had to pull a punishment card from a stack of colored index cards. There was even a wild card, which meant pulling another random punishment, and a free card, meaning you got off the hook. If you went a whole day without punishment, you earned rewards, and if you had a perfect week, there were bonus rewards. Rewards were poker chips that you could save up and cash in for a predetermined list of perks like extra computer time, a soda, and so on. If you could make a case for it, the chips could also count as a $1 credit towards something from the store. The idea was to phase the whole system out eventually, since we were too old to be on something this structured forever. Some things were adjusted along the way. For example, the soda reward was removed after Daniel used his tokens to buy an entire 12-pack that he hoarded in his room, refusing to share. Mom tried to get rid of the bonus game time perk too, but I pushed back hard. I pointed out that I rarely used the soda or game rewards anyway, and more importantly, she hadn't gotten a family consensus to eliminate anything. It was just her and Dad trying to pull it, which violated the system's rules. I refused to let her punish everyone else because she wouldn't deal with Daniel's entitlement. She didn't like that one bit and started trying to sabotage the system. She used wild cards as an excuse to take away our playtime, something specifically against the rules. Dad and I saw right through it. We knew this blessed system, which we all loved for its structure and fairness, was on borrowed time. It protected us from her whims, and we'd all signed a kind of mock contract agreeing to follow the system until a certain end date. Her sabotage started slowly. She forgot to hand out reward tokens. Dad would step in and distribute them. Then she started misplacing the paper slips we used to keep track of how many tokens we had. But we were racking up too many, and she didn't like it. At that point, I discovered Dad had been keeping a ledger of who had what tokens since he, too, had a stack of reward coins and knew exactly what Mom was up to. I had to get a ledger myself, a ripped-up notebook, because I was determined not to let her find and destroy anything that tracked our earned rewards. Around this time, our internet provider offered a deal. If we got a brand new Wi-Fi router, we could get a month of faster bandwidth at half price or upgrade to the next best router, which required wired connections. Dad, Daniel, and I were all excited about finally getting a wireless router because Mom had been turning off internet access to certain rooms after throwing a fit when the router was placed in the hot, stuffy garage over her car. Not exactly an ideal spot for a router, but perfect for a vindictive, unemployed housewife on a power trip. Unsurprisingly, we never got the Wi-Fi router, and Mom's behavior toward the rule system that kept her in check only worsened. She started unplugging the wired cables, which hurt our schooling since more courses were moving online. The therapist had given us a time frame to stick with the rule system before phasing it out, but we weren't even a quarter of the way through when Mom's entitled side exploded. One day, she stormed down the hall where I was perched on a chair in front of Daniel's PS3 loading a game, red-faced and steaming, with a brown smear on her ankle. "Abraxas, you didn't pick up all the dog poop yesterday before you mowed the lawn, and I got it all over my foot. You lost your game time, that's against the rules. I get to make you draw a punishment card. Mom, fine, have it your way." She waddled and limped down the hall and slammed the punishment cards down on the kitchen counter, grinning like she'd won the lottery. We'd all been marking our cards for months with cooking stains and sauces, so we knew what was coming. My top card was a free pass, so I pulled it and showed it to her. That's not fair. Draw another. Sorry, Mom, but failing to pick up dog poop only means one draw. And you knew there was a chance to pull the free card out of all 32. I don't have to draw, it's against the rules. Mom turned a lovely shade of purple as I turned away and used my hour of game time. That was the final straw for the rule system. Mom took all the reward tokens from everyone and threw them in the trash, right in front of Dad. Dad confronted her, saying it was against the therapist's advice and that the family hadn't agreed to end the system. A shouting match erupted, ending with Dad pulling out all the punishment cards and throwing them in the trash with the tokens, then dumping wet coffee grounds on the mess to ruin her precious index cards. Dad said if she was going to break the rules and ignore the therapist's warnings about stopping the rewards, he'd ruin the punishment system so she couldn't arbitrarily punish us with a broken set of rules. Mom eventually started screaming. She threatened to call the cops and tried to drag Daniel and me around the house, using us as a human shield even though Dad had never been physically violent toward her. She screamed at us to leave her alone or she'd call the police. It was like she expected us to accept going back to the way things were before, but with even more unpaid chores and rules piled on. She just couldn't let go of her ego long enough to let the therapist-approved system work and undo the damage she'd caused over 25 years. She flat out refused to admit she'd done anything wrong. I still remember the stone look on her face when Dad dumped coffee on the pink, green, and white card she adored. Honestly, the system was more suited to elementary kids, but she was too busy being an entitled control freak to entertain the idea that certified child therapists might actually know what they were talking about. It never occurred to her that it would take far longer than 7 months to undo the damage she'd inflicted over the years, alongside all the other trauma from her daily abuses. How I moved away from my entitled mother. Let's introduce the cast and name the story. Daniel, my entitled brother. Mom, my entitled mother. Dad, a cool, now retired military man. Andy, a good-for-nothing parasite in a human skin bubble. My amazing girlfriend. And me, just me. When Andy first came to our house, he tried to worm his way into every aspect of our lives, typical behavior for an entitled person. But he met resistance the moment he ran into Mom. There was no room in our family for a second entitled parasite. He tried to get close to both her and Dad, but game recognizes game. Mom openly discouraged him from being around, and Dad, after nearly 25 years of marriage, had developed a thick skin and little tolerance for certain behaviors. So Andy turned his attention to me. While I enjoyed having someone to talk about anime with, I wasn't about to let him sink his hooks into me, not after a lifetime of mistreatment from Mom. He gave up trying to recruit me into the Andy is Always Right club when he attempted to convince Dad to get a third PlayStation controller so we could all play group games. The conversation went something like this, though it happened about 10 years ago. His last remark stuck with me. Dad kicked him out of the house for 3 weeks because of it, and Mom also lost her mind, probably because she wanted to be the only one treating me poorly. Andy said, Daniel should have a third controller. I see Abi's watching from the next room, they don't cost that much, and she seems really interested in playing with us. What Andy didn't know was I had quietly walked into the room behind him and overheard everything. He'd spent the last few weeks complaining that a roommate had stolen his controllers to sell for narcotic money. I didn't care if it was a lie or not, but he'd also tried to convince Daniel to buy him a controller with his own money. And he didn't get very far for about a month once he realized my brother didn't have a dime. He was just trying to climb the ladder to get what he wanted. I made it clear, we didn't need a third controller, and if I wanted to play Soul Calibur, I'd wait until he and Daniel were done. I didn't want to interfere with their time together since Daniel had issues with me being in the same room while he was on the PlayStation or with me at all. Oh my god, Abraxas. Andy snapped, spinning around angrily and glaring at the scapegoat he was trying to use to get his way. Needless to say, he didn't get what he wanted. He huffed, puffed, and fumed like the entitled monster he was. Eventually, Andy realized he also couldn't make any headway with Daniel when Mom was involved. So he missed out on plenty of things like sleeping over without warning, borrowing money, and having us buy him gifts and food. He also complained that we didn't cook like his dad and refused to completely change our diets to mimic Japanese cuisine when he was over, which he insisted was the superior diet. Andy vented a lot about Mom to me when he was around, and Mom complained about Andy to me when he was gone. I never had a moment of peace. A few other things about Andy. He wore an electronic ankle bracelet like the one Martha Stewart had, which infuriated Dad when he found out. Dad knew the convictions that required those bracelets could have cost him his security clearance. Spoiler alert, I knew what Andy had done, and he tried to downplay it, but clearly the law saw it differently. Andy didn't mind damaging our stuff either. He actually warped the motherboard of my Xbox 360, and I had to replace it myself with an Xbox 360 arcade. The only thing Andy did somewhat right was trying to get Daniel to move out for selfish reasons. It took him half a year to convince my brother. Interested in moving out myself, I decided to sit back and watch it all unfold since it would help me get out of that place successfully, just like I'd done since middle school. Quietly watching my brother fight Mom, learning from how that entitled leech fared, and improving my own approach. I had to give Mom some credit. Neither Andy nor Daniel had money or any real intention to work. They were making plans based on the assumption they'd get social security checks, and that Andy's dad would fill in the financial gaps. Andy tried for over an hour to debunk this, but his constant bragging about how his dad lived, contradictions about his dad not being able to pay certain bills, and his general unwillingness to do anything except watch TV and quit every job he ever had were obstacles to his goal of dragging my doormat brother out of our house. Family therapy sessions after this became really strained. The therapist told Dad in private that he didn't think Mom would ever let Daniel out of her sight because she liked having her kids live at home. It was convenient for her, saving her from chores and responsibility more than she cared about their success as independent adults ready to stake their claim in the world. I believe the therapist too. Every suggestion made to improve our relationships was initially accepted but then twisted to benefit Mom. For example, the idea that kids need to learn how to cook before becoming independent somehow turned into cooking her a gourmet meal once a week. Like any college student is really going to go out of their way to make chicken cordon bleu, shrimp scampi, or tikka masala. All you really need is to cover the food groups in something tasty and edible. I kind of hate cooking now because of Mom, and honestly, my girlfriend wishes I was more willing to cook these days. During this whole fiasco, Bubbles and I had been planning to move. As a military brat, I knew how to handle moving across states, while she hadn't really left the city before. It took a little convincing, but she agreed to save money for the move, plan expenses, arrange a place to stay in San Francisco, find a roommate to help with costs, and rent a moving van. I kept her updated on what was going on with Andy as we buckled down and saved. It took me 2 weeks to work up the nerve and wait for the right moment to approach Mom when we both felt confident about moving. It happened in the summer, during a time when Andy hadn't been around for weeks. She wasn't happy and pulled all the same tricks on me that she had used on my brother. But having a backbone and knowing how my brother's attempt failed, I was more than ready to take control. Hey Mom, I've been thinking about this for a long time. Don't interrupt me when I'm in the kitchen. I can't even remember what she tried to say, but it wasn't so important that she couldn't listen. I waited until she went back to the living room with the rest of the family. Daniel was tuning everything out, wishing he could be in his room playing League, but Mom had dragged him out to socialize in the living room. Dad was sitting in his chair watching the evening news. Mom, I've been thinking about something, and I feel it's time. Bubbles and I are moving to San Francisco in a few months. We scouted the area last year with one of our friends. Remember Paperman from Ian? If you're underage, don't look that up. It's an 18-plus convention. He's going to be our roommate. Mom blinked. What? Moving out. We've been saving for over a year to get a moving van, and I was wondering if you might help us. You can't move out. You don't have a job, and Bubbles gets government checks. I still have over $4,000 left from when I was hit by that truck in high school. Both Bubbles and Paperman get those checks, so we'll be fine until I can find a job up there. Mom scoffed. What makes you think you'll do any better up there than here with your family? I bet you haven't even planned this out. As a military brat, I'd had a front row seat to every move as we followed Dad around the country. I knew this process much better than Bubbles, and I'd even packed my own things flawlessly for our last 2-year city moves. We've been planning and saving for over a year, including for the security deposit. Bubbles' parents can't take time off work to drive the moving van, which is why I've been asking you for help. You've got a choice. Help us drive the stuff up and see the place for yourself, or stay here and only ever get an address. I left the living room and called Bubbles to tell her what I'd just done. I was shaking, sure Mom was going to burst into my room to scream, break my stuff, or threaten to kick me out, but nothing happened. The months leading up to the move were strangely peaceful. Dad agreed to drive us north, with one of my college teachers helping out, and we finally moved out of our parents' houses on our own, feeling happy and free. I spent months doing things I couldn't do at home, 3 whole days glued to the computer before Bubbles got me off it, and I downloaded every free app game on my new phone that I could handle. I held several jobs, made new friends, and have kept very low contact with that witch of a woman ever since. I know some people might say I should have gone no contact completely, but part of me still longs for some connection with my mom like my girlfriend has with her own mom. Dad says he's proud of me for that day, the day I finally turned my back on Mom and never looked back. I haven't gone back, and I wouldn't. She can keep that house and Daniel all to herself since Dad divorced her. I just hope Daniel won't regret his choices, since he refuses to see her faults and still dates that parasite. Entitled Mom Demands Disabled Daughter Get a Job, using homelessness as motivation. This part of the story began weeks after the breakup, back in 2007, when Mom cost me my job. I couldn't say they loved me there, but I was treated with kindness as their first and only student hire from community college. For my birthday, the department lead hand-delivered a cupcake, and on my last day, someone even sneaked out to the UC new hire luncheon to get me a cake as a send-off. I felt validated, worthwhile, and for the first time in my life, treated like an adult. After that, I moped through the rest of my courses, barely passing, and spent the weeks between spring and summer semesters lying around the house. I'd never taken summer classes before, and I wasn't planning on it now. Then Mom took offense again this time because I refused to give up my time to work in the garden with her. I wasn't looking for a new job, and I didn't seem to care about her arbitrary punishments, which I bet angered her the most. One week, she harassed me relentlessly to get dressed and shoved me out the front door, nearly shouting that I had to go to Copy Ninja to print my resume and not come back until 4 p.m. She even packed my purse and left it on the front mailbox. By then, most places had kiosks near customer service for online applications, and the only places offering same-day interviews were ones that didn't treat employees well. Knowing arguing was pointless through the locked door, I slumped to the bus and did as I was told. For a week, I obediently went from store to store trying to apply for work. Most times I was just directed online and never got an interview. Mom let me tell her where I'd gone to apply in person, but at the end of the week, she huffed that I must not be trying hard enough. Since I didn't have a job yet, it turned out Mom expected me to walk into no less than 10 stores a day and interview like in her day, before things got expensive and technology streamlined the hiring process. By week 2 of being kicked out daily, I realized I could spend my time more efficiently by going to 3 different public libraries and spending about an hour at each using their internet to apply for entry-level jobs, since I still had a library card. No interviews, yet it was summer after all. The libraries were also the only places with consistent air conditioning, and I started sneaking snacks from home and buying one fast food meal a day so I wouldn't starve. When meals started being declined, I discovered I'd hit my debit card limit and had to go to my bank's local branch to raise it so I could keep eating. Thankfully, the Mermaid Coffee Company gave out free water, so I stayed hydrated. By week 3, I started going to campus to apply for jobs. The library there was open, so I saved a lot of travel time and could apply online efficiently. With my student ID, campus police assumed I had classes, but I basically stayed in the library from open until nearly 4 p.m. every day. I kept digging for any tips or tricks on how to impress managers during interviews, and took small breaks to play flash games, because all work and no play makes for dull senses. Mom started pulling the landline cable to my room from the router to stop me from playing games. She didn't seem to understand when I told her repeatedly that places weren't interested in walk-ins with printed resumes anymore. To her, any time I spent on a computer, whether for work, school, or courses, was just gaming. She would barge into whichever room she wanted, glaring at my screen trying to catch me playing, even though I wasn't nearly as addicted to PC games as my brother. She was convinced I wasn't really trying and promised there'd be consequences if I didn't have an interview soon. By week 6, Mom was upset that I seemed to be ignoring the fast food industry. She didn't consider my disability a liability in the kitchen and didn't have any food handling certification. Besides, I had some pride. If I was going to put myself in constant danger at work, I wanted hazard pay, which was only for careers I wasn't qualified for and physically couldn't do. By then, I landed an interview at a realtor's office, but never got called back for a second one. I was really trying, but as long as businesses don't openly admit they're excluding you because of the unknown costs of accommodating a disability, they can keep you out of the hiring pool without consequences. Meanwhile, my entitled brother Daniel got to sleep all day, play PS4 games, avoid helping in the garden where he maliciously destroyed every plant he touched, and cook just one meal a week for the family. His parasitic boyfriend came over daily for free food and internet. Daniel also joined in telling me what a failure I was during this whole ordeal, parroting Mom's words without any original thought, because he's a doormat to the most emotionally and mentally manipulative person around. I tried every trick I learned from disabled student programs, the Department of Rehabilitation, and Workability to find a job, but nothing worked. I applied to every job I was capable of doing, including those specifically advertising hiring disabled individuals, following the advice from D and DSPS. I tried to convince businesses to hire me since the government encouraged companies to employ a percentage of their workforce from disabled applicants as a tax write-off. Yet, no place I disclosed my vision issues to ever call me back. I learned that just because companies could hire me didn't mean they had to. as long as they met the quota of disabled employees overall. My eating habits caused me to lose weight, which might have been okay if it hadn't triggered my anemia and iron deficiency, not the more dangerous type. I was emotionally, mentally, and physically drained as the deadline for the supposed unspecified consequence loomed. Meanwhile, the interviews I did manage to get were ignored in favor of this looming punishment. Then the doomsday arrived. I woke early to the familiar sound that, since childhood, meant violence and abuse. I didn't want to get out of bed, but it wasn't a choice I had. Mom barged into my room, flipped me off my bed drill sergeant style, and began stuffing my clothes, intimate items, and socks into a suitcase. She hadn't worked a paying job since 1993, while I had been working since the early 2000s. Yet here she was kicking me out as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I had a large settlement from a car accident, but that morning, I was out on the streets, looking like I was headed to the airport. My ears were ringing with Mom's words, "Get a job or never come back." I used a pay phone to call my girlfriend and tell her what had happened, and then I was homeless. She was worried because I had kept this entire ordeal from her until then. Confrontations like this caused her anxiety. She lived in her parents' 3-bedroom house with her 2 little sisters and 2 medium-sized dogs. As tempting as it was to ask for help, I knew from our time together that there was no room for another person. Plus, I didn't want to impose not like a parasite. I valued my girlfriend's mom's opinion of me. That woman was the perfect example of a fair but firm mother who loved without limits and was loved by her family. I can't recall how Dad found out what happened since Mom threw me out while he was at his contractor job, but I do remember he found me a cheap hotel near the Marine recruitment base, for which I was grateful. My only comforts were the Nintendo DS and charger I'd hidden in my purse lining, my monthly bus pass, the free water from Mermaid Coffee Company, and the knowledge that the people who truly cared about me were worried. I stayed in the hotel for a week, paying $50 a day. They offered complimentary continental breakfast each morning. I bought fast food and snacks from the dollar store daily as I struggled, stressed, and cried trying to meet Mom's demands. On the second day of my exile, Mom came by with home-cooked food and a snide comment about how I'd made things hard for myself by being a lazy, entitled person who thought they could leech off their parents. It hurt to hear that, since I was the one going to college and had worked hard for 2 months trying to find a job, while my brother did exactly what she expected living off his parasite boyfriend, whom Mom loathed. After a week, I packed up and moved to another motel across the street. That motel didn't offer a complimentary breakfast, so I went back to eating just 1 meal and 1 snack a day. I got Dad's work cell number, and he told me a time when I could call him, which I did using the motel room phone. He promised to find a way for me to come home. Although I never wanted to be under Mom's control again, I was burning through my settlement money faster than I liked since this new place was more expensive. Dad came through. Somehow, he convinced Mom to let me come back if I enrolled for the fall semester, and sent her a printout of my transcript. I'm ashamed to admit I took this escape from homelessness and returned to that dumpster fire of parental care. Even then, I had learned that Mom honestly didn't care if I was medically unsuited for certain jobs. She was willing to put me at risk just to meet her selfish goals. Her ideas about finding work were outdated, and she refused to admit she was wrong or that times had changed. I knew I had to get out of that house. Mom was a creature of habit. Whenever she discovered a new tactic to get what she wanted, she overused it without regard for the consequences on those around her. It seems I confused some people, so let me clarify a few things from the comments. This all happened in 2007, and yes, I eventually moved out in 2013. My medical condition is called septo-optic dysplasia, SOD, which involves underdevelopment of the optic nerve and or pituitary gland. Since the pituitary gland controls human development, most people with SOD rarely develop physically or mentally beyond kindergarten or first grade. I've met some of them, and it makes me sad, especially knowing I'm considered normal compared to others. This is a birth defect with no current cure. I woke up today to find a lot of comments missing. I'm not sure if moderators removed them or if the users deleted them themselves. My brother and I reconciled like adults before bed and are on good terms now. I never wanted anyone to be harassed over a small misunderstanding like confusing the origin of a post from another subreddit. I hope the commenter is doing okay. After my mom finally got the divorce she wanted for over 20 years, we went no contact. The backstory: the initial divorce trial happened when my brother and I were in middle school. Mom was deeply unhappy in her marriage, which is not uncommon in military families. She was an Air Force brat who married into the Navy and had kids with special needs. Her acceptance of Dad and me was seasonal and predictable. There were periods of tolerance followed by times of intense anger and resentment. We stuck together to survive those storms. At this point, Dad was weeks away from returning from deployment when everything fell apart. Mom was surly and angry, indulging in a common narcissistic parent trait called parentification, forcing her teenage kids to handle adult problems. Her list of grievances was long. Some were legitimate, but many she created through her own words and actions, which were often manipulative and abusive. She claimed Dad wasn't emotionally present, that he was terrible with money, and that if it weren't for her, he'd have spent everything on himself, none of which was true. We didn't have much in the way of family savings, but we never went hungry and always had some basic comforts and amenities. I can't remember all the details, but Mom had a list of about 30 complaints, half of which she caused herself through the abuse and manipulation she directed at all of us. Some issues she had some control over, but chose to worsen, and the rest were fairly legitimate. Then she dropped the bombshell about the divorce, saying she would be taking us, and that she had already emptied the joint account she shared with Dad, moving the money into her personal bank account. We didn't know how to process that information. I remember my jaw literally dropping before I found the courage to say I'd rather go with Dad. Of course, that was impossible since he was enlisted, and she gleefully reminded me of that. I was proud of Daniel when he declared he wanted to go with Nana, our maternal grandmother, but Mom vetoed that hard. Knowing what I do now about her father's preferences, I understand why, and I'm actually glad she did it for me. The only thing Mom hadn't done yet was file the divorce papers. She was waiting for Dad to come home. Meanwhile, my brother and I acted out constantly, as kids caught in the middle of a divorce often do. Daniel started picking fights with kids both older and younger than himself, getting suspended almost every week. I resorted to stealing food and treats from the house to sell at school for some extra money, since Mom refused to give us an allowance. I had this idea that if I worked hard enough, I could buy a bus ticket to Texas. I also stole a multi-tool from my brother and used it to rip staples and nails from a telephone pole where I waited for the bus. I wasn't very discreet about it, and that got me expelled under zero-tolerance policies. It was a wild time, not something I'm proud of, with police often being called because of the frequent screaming matches and fights. Meanwhile, Mom kept up the act of a poor, suffering housewife who did no wrong and was mistreated by her abusive military husband, trying to pressure Dad into starting the divorce as soon as he got home. I'm not sure why she insisted he had to initiate it, but it was what she wanted. Dad had never raised a hand to anyone like Mom did. But every few days Mom would grab one of us and drag us around the house like a human shield, screaming at Dad to leave her alone. It was a terrible time. After one of these meat shield incidents, when Mom swung me into a door frame while trying to get away, and I thought my nose was broken, it wasn't. I reached out to Nana, crying, because I needed someone to confide in besides my best friend, Bubbles. Nana seemed like a savior that day. She showed up in a champagne-colored Silverado like a knight on a unicorn and gave Mom a serious dressing down in front of the whole family. She called Mom selfish for not thinking about the damage she was causing to her daughter and the family. Nana accused Mom of deliberately trying to provoke Dad into pulling his gun, something I had no idea even existed in the house, so she could get him arrested. Nana finished by reminding Mom about one of her high school friends who went through her parents' divorce when Mom was her age and ended up a teenage mother who dropped out of school and got involved with narcotics. The divorce eventually fizzled out not long after, but nothing was ever the same. Mom continued to passively aggressively unsettle Dad from time to time, threatening divorce whenever he upset her too much. The thought of dealing with all the paperwork intimidated Dad, so he refused to file, even though Mom was acting more bitter than usual. I guess you could say we became sponges for that kind of tension. Having developed a high tolerance, it was the lesser of two evils, to just let her be and hope the next day would be better. She vowed she would ruin Dad if the divorce ever went through and swore she'd take everything he had. She was convinced that Daniel and I would side with her over Dad. Spoiler alert, I never did. This whole traumatic experience stayed with me because Mom doesn't just threaten, she makes promises. I knew I'd see this Pandora's box open again in the future. Eventually, I realized what Nana had done wasn't salvation, but only a temporary reprieve, and that hammer kept getting heavier every year. Now, for the story you've all been waiting for, and to set the stage, you should know a bit about Mom's behavior. She hasn't held a paying job since the early 90s. She volunteered constantly, which looks good on a resume, but means nothing if you never use that resume to become financially independent. She relied entirely on her husband's salary and had cut ties with her parents years earlier, encouraged by her therapist, as part of addressing her childhood trauma. While I was living independently in a different part of the state, the divorce hammer was reaching a breaking point. Both Mom and Daniel had been excluding Dad from their lives, even though they'd all been living in the same house since 2004. Mom's harassment of Dad escalated to the point where she didn't even want him going to the kitchen for food or drinks because he had to walk past the living room where she spent her free time every day. Dad bought a mini fridge and kept it locked in the master bedroom closet, so he wouldn't have to leave his little sanctuary, which had a locked door and a connected bathroom. He also started drinking heavily, not healthy, but given the situation, it seemed like the lesser evil. Marriage counseling, family counseling, and individual therapy had done nothing to stop the downward spiral of their relationship. Mom, being who she is, ordered Daniel to use one of his tools to unlock Dad's sanctuary door so she could continue berating him daily. Dad had a fridge, TV, and PS3 in that room, and each time he retreated further into the master bathroom, which Daniel couldn't open to wait out Mom until she stopped banging on the door and left, Dad would eventually scream insults back at her. I could hear it over the phone when I called on holidays and birthdays. In 2016, I agreed to visit for Christmas, but didn't spend much time at their house. I stubbornly guarded every last minute of my time when it came to her. Our Christmas wasn't over the top, but it was Dad's favorite holiday ever since he was a boy. He always took on the lion's share of decorating, putting up lights, getting a tree after Thanksgiving, picking the tree with the family, and buying new themed decorations if Mom wanted to mix things up. You could see the care and attention he put into the interior and exterior decorations, and I enjoyed seeing how happy it made him even if the house was a little hazardous for me with all the breakables around. The only thing I came into contact with this year was the tree, no ornaments, bare minimum lights, no stockings, no presents, and Dad was miserable. It turned out that last year's meager decorations, which were just getting a tree to decorate, had been a struggle for him to get Daniel involved. This year, Dad was completely burnt out trying to include people who didn't want him in their lives. After I opened my present, he pulled me aside and told me this would be the last Christmas I'd see them all together. I learned all of this through text since Mom liked to use me as the middle person in her fights. I tried to emotionally support Dad, as I had since elementary school. Yes, I know it's considered unhealthy, but I never asked to be forced into emotionally adult situations before I was even legally an adult. I refused to be a messenger to snitch on Dad, or vice versa. Eventually, Mom got what she wanted. It only took her blowing up at an artist at a public show for mailing a commission to Dad's office. The benefits of siding with Mom on the divorce outweighed the drawbacks, and Dad finally started the process. He made itemized lists with costs and receipts of things he wanted and things he wanted Mom to have. Apparently, the lawyer was impressed since Mom usually didn't go into such detail, but Dad said they'd understand once he started working with Mom. Mom got wind of this, and despite threatening divorce for over 20 years, she didn't seem eager to see it through. She woke up before sunrise every day to make herself breakfast and lunch, then left the house in her car, never going to the same part of town twice a week, always taking detours if she thought someone was following her. She'd return home around midnight and repeat the cycle. She did this for 3 months, with Daniel supporting her while she stonewalled Dad. Dad couldn't serve Mom the papers personally, and the lawyer's associate only made 3 attempts before it fell to Dad to somehow get it done without handing it to her himself. He knew Mom was trying to gather any evidence of cheating or wrongdoing to use against him. In the end, one of Dad's co-workers cornered Mom in the house and slipped the papers through a nearly closed door while she threatened to call the cops and screamed like a banshee. It was the best way to serve her, honestly, and I felt a little bad for the situation, but Mom had made her bed months earlier, and now she was forced to lie in it. After this, Mom created a support group chat via text, made up of a few close friends who never questioned her when she cried and complained about Dad. One of those friends, who had divorced her ex just a year before, thought I should be more supportive of Mom instead of questioning things she said that didn't match my experience growing up with her. That friend and I disagreed. Her trauma was recent, and she blindly accepted all of Mom's side since she was only presented with part of the story. My trauma was long-term, and I had seen Mom's true face and entitlement. Unlike the others, we agreed not to speak to each other after that, as we couldn't reconcile. There was a difference of opinion about Mom. The group chat was full of love, kindness, and support for her, which she genuinely needed from more people than just Daniel. But at the same time, I was nearly physically sick as they insisted Mom was blameless. They didn't know this dumpster fire the way I did. They hadn't lived with her two-faced lies and manipulations or known the details she was leaving out, like why it took Dad 3 months to serve her or why she went to such lengths to avoid the one thing she seemed to have wanted for years. It turned out the Marine-based divorce attorney was backed up by 4 months, and Mom wanted to see him before she got served so she could serve Dad instead. She nearly managed it, but conveniently forgot to mention this, making it look like she was afraid for her life living with an alcoholic who suddenly became obsessed with tracking her every move, claiming she had to hide out at her newest nonprofit at odd hours, and insisting Dad had paid someone to harass her on and off campus. Mom never threatens, she makes promises. The support group didn't know what she planned to do to Dad, how, or when, but I did. I used to be trapped at home for hours with her digging her talons into my arm in middle school, forced to listen as she outlined her plans to destroy Dad back then. I remembered it all. She intended to go nuclear, burn every bridge possible. Dad's security clearance was sensitive. Any arrest or association with someone with a questionable record could get it revoked. The job paid well, and he got the clearance easily due to his military background. Despite his drinking, he avoided legal trouble and distanced himself from Daniel's boyfriend Andy. Losing this job would hurt Mom and Daniel, but it would hurt Dad's future employment prospects even more, and that was her goal. Then Mom came to the chat claiming Dad had attacked her, saying she broke her 4th and 5th metatarsals while defending herself. She shared a photo of her bandaged hand from the doctor's office along with the x-ray. For those who don't know, this type of injury, commonly called a boxer's break, happens when someone hits something with a closed fist. It's not usually a defensive injury. Praise, sympathy, and support poured in for her. I cautiously asked if she was okay and if she planned to press charges. Her response was a cryptic thanks for being concerned, mentioning she was on painkillers and would keep us updated. Someone else suggested she should press charges, but she never responded to that. A few days later, I asked again privately if she was going to press charges and received the same vague reply as before, with a direct quote timestamp from her original message. This told me she was doing what she did best, lying through her teeth and openly displaying her hypocrisy for anyone who could read her like a book. If she hadn't pressed charges yet, she was clearly in the middle of it. I texted Dad to get his side and was able to piece together what happened by comparing both accounts and their known tendencies to exaggerate, just like Mom had taught me to do. Lesson learned. Mom, there are as many sides to a story as there are people who witnessed the incident, and I was determined to find out what really happened. It seems this is how it played out. Angry about being served, Mom barged into the master bedroom to confront Dad. He followed his lawyer's advice and didn't respond to her accusations or demands. He put down his game controller and got up from the bed to walk away from the confrontation. But Mom, furious, punched him in the back. Because of a bad knee, he collapsed like a ton of bricks partially onto the bed, then scrambled to his feet just as she leaned up for another swing. He bolted into the master bathroom with more speed than you'd expect from someone his size. Mom missed the second punch during the chase, hitting the closet instead. The cheap door came off its hinges, and she broke her hand, all while screaming profanities. Both of them called the cops. Dad developed a bruise near his kidneys and quickly packed everything he could fit into his truck. At first, Mom's statement to the police matched what she'd texted to us. She and Daniel both said Dad had never hit her, and that night was no exception. Even Daniel admitted he'd heard Mom hit the closet. But later, he changed his statement so that Mom could file for a restraining order, which was granted. Dad had to move out with whatever belongings he could take with him to stay in compliance. I spent that weekend digging into California divorce law. If Mom was really going to go through with what she'd threatened 20 years ago, I wanted to understand what she might try to pull. From what I found, because the marriage lasted over 10 years and Dad had been the primary earner, Mom would be entitled to a portion of his income decided by a judge until a time determined by the court or until she could prove she was financially self-sufficient. If she wanted to keep living in that house, she needed Dad working. But she was too stuck in her ways to get a job herself. I sent Mom one final private message asking if she planned to press charges for the so-called attack. Once again, I got the same vague thanks for being concerned response, but this time, she left out the original timestamp. I was being stonewalled. She didn't want to hear anything that didn't support her perspective, and she knew I'd never blindly accepted her version of events when it came to Dad. I always dug for the truth, and my track record was nearly flawless. Every time she'd lied or twisted facts to make him look bad and herself innocent, I caught it. I waited a week, hoping she'd respond to my messages and praying I was wrong about what she intended to do. So far, though, everything was unfolding exactly as she had described years ago. Only this time, it wasn't as successful as she had claimed it would be, likely because no minors were involved. Still no reply. At that point, I had to make a choice: stay silent and watch my brother go down in flames with her, since he couldn't seem to form any opinion outside of hers, or speak up, knowing that if everything went up in flames anyway, at least I tried to steer her away from a course of action bound to backfire. I went to the group chat to share what I had learned about what might happen during the divorce. I pointed out that if Mom pressed charges, Dad could lose his job, and without his income, she wouldn't be able to afford to keep renting the house. I explained that it was unwise to jeopardize his employment, especially when Daniel only worked at a grocery store deli counter and the job market was tougher than ever. Mom wasn't likely to find a job easily either. If she followed through on the petty revenge she'd been swearing she'd get since 1998, it would cost her more than she could realistically afford in California. I knew she'd be angry, but I'd already tried to bring this up privately, and was ignored. So, I decided to say it somewhere she couldn't pretend not to hear, the group chat. The chat was silent for about 5 hours before Mom finally posted a message I've kept to this day, just to remind myself never to feel bad for her again. Then, she removed me from the chat and went on with her pity party. One of her friends, the one who had already been through a divorce, messaged me asking how I'd learned all this and why I hadn't gone to Mom directly. I told her I had, but Mom was ignoring my messages. I saved that whole conversation, even now 2 years later, because I still look at Mom's message whenever I start to feel even a shred of sympathy. It read, "Friends, I'm sorry about my daughter Abraxas Siren's remarks, as she doesn't understand this forum is for updates only. Personal responses should be handled personally. I believe I have removed her from this conversation and will confirm with the phone company today. Please block her number. Again, I'm sorry for putting you in this uncomfortable position, which I didn't foresee happening." Classic entitled mother behavior. I assumed I was blocked and didn't bother testing it. If she wanted to go no contact because I shamed her in a group chat after she refused to engage with me privately, that was her decision. We'd already been low contact for 7 years, and not having to manage her constant stream of messages or deal with her blowing up my phone when I didn't reply was honestly a relief. I never shared what either parent was doing with the other. I never posted the drama on social media, aside from a single mention that I was worried about my brother. He was briefly suspended while his clearance was reevaluated, but he was transparent with his employer about the proceedings. He shared the police report showing he'd been attacked by his wife, along with the doctor's report on the damage to his back and knees from the fall. He got to keep his job, but had to live out of a hotel. He followed his lawyer's advice to the letter. The divorce proceedings were as ugly as you'd expect. Mom burned through 2 military divorce lawyers before finding one she liked. She made her own list of demands, asking for half the monetary value of everything. All Dad wanted were the items in the house that were his, or that were bought with his preferences, and 9 things of much lower value than what he offered to let Mom keep. He was planning to move back to his hometown in Texas and agreed to bring me the belongings I had left behind and never had a chance to retrieve. That last part, getting my things, didn't go as planned. It took 7 months to get everything sorted out. The judge ordered that a percentage of Dad's income would go to Mom for the next several years, but also ruled that Mom had to secure employment within a set time frame. She was required to provide her lawyer with proof that she was actively job hunting, specifically 10 applications per week. Somehow, she couldn't manage more than 3 a week, despite the fact that when she kicked me out for 2 weeks, she had me applying to 10 places a day and demanding proof. The restraining order was later overturned after Dad's lawyer pointed out inconsistencies in Daniel's statement. His account had changed significantly between the initial police report and the restraining order approval. On top of that, since Daniel was legally an adult, he never should have been included under Mom's restraining order, as if he were a minor. He should have applied for a separate one himself. This was apparently news to Daniel, but by then the damage had already been done. The restraining order stuck long enough that every time Dad was pulled over, the cops would double-check for outstanding warrants. His lawyer warned him this would happen, and sure enough, it did. For an entire year after all this, the only contact I had with Mom came in the form of screenshots of her phone bill whenever I forgot to pay my portion of our shared phone plan. I never responded to the messages, but always paid promptly so I wouldn't have to. One time, I got a notice from the phone company that a line had been added or removed, and I panicked, thinking Mom had found a new level of pettiness. But it turned out she had just added Daniel to the plan, finally letting him have a phone of his own. I guess that percentage of Dad's income wasn't enough to cover her expenses, so she needed help with the bill. I'm genuinely happy for Daniel. Now he can play Pokemon Go and do all the things we dreamed about as kids, things we never got to do because we didn't have phones growing up. Dad is doing much better these days. He spends time with one of his favorite sisters and reconnects with old high school friends who always had his back. He's got a new job that pays just as well as the last one, and he's in therapy. He's cut down on drinking and is even losing weight. If the pandemic allows, I'm planning to spend Christmas with him and my aunt. I never really knew Dad's side of the family because Mom wouldn't allow it. I grew up hearing horror stories about them. Then, in mid-November 2019, Mom texted me to say Papa had died. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't meant as one, but it felt like a signal. She was finally free from the shadow that had loomed over her since childhood. That message wasn't about reconciling. It was about closure for her. Still, she never actually said she was sorry, not even when she was clearly in the wrong. But I guess that message was her version of an apology. In her eyes, it's all I deserved. I know I embarrassed Mom by calling her out in front of her friends. I won't deny that. But I did it with the hope of waking her up because I knew her better than anyone else in that chat. I didn't want her to end up homeless, with only my brother left to support her, especially after she burned every bridge with family who might have helped. Still, I I won't apologize for what I said, not until she does. I've given up too much because of her. I'm not letting go of this. My entitled brother doesn't mind putting me at risk as long as it means he gets out of doing yard work. For those of you who followed my stories, you already know the cast of characters. But for those just tuning into my tales of W, let's break it down. Me, a visually disabled nerd. Daniel, my entitled brother, basically the real-life version of Daniel Duck. Guest appearances by our parents whenever the drama requires it. This story started in the late 90s and stretched into the early 2010s, when I finally got the hell out. This was our ongoing battle from elementary school through high school and even into college. It all began after Mom injured her foot, or more accurately, aggravated a bone spur that caused two opposing tendons to lock up so badly that surgery became the only option. She used to handle all the yard work herself, but we had a gopher problem. She'd twist her already injured foot in the gopher holes, and one day, after limping into the house in frustration, she declared that Daniel and I would be taking over lawn duty every week, and we were to figure out how to divide the labor between us. For context, we had an old gas-powered mower and a 1-gallon refill tank. Dad spent a solid hour showing us how to use the mower properly, how to check the oil and gas levels, how to refill the tank, and most importantly that we should never add gas while the motor was hot. He also taught us how to recognize the sound the mower made when it was running low on fuel, a kind of sputtering that was unmistakable. The chore came with some very specific rules. Some were standard, and others were added thanks to incidents involving Daniel and me, but I'm not saying which were which. Do not leave grass clippings inside the mower when you're done. If you mow first, don't leave the clippings in the bag for the other person. Always attach the clipping bag to the mower, or you'll be cleaning up the mess. If you use up the refill gas can, refill it. When mowing the backyard, you're also responsible for poop scooping and removing the dog's toys. This prevents unnecessary damage and avoids the spread of poop as a fine brown mist. Do not run over sprinklers. No slacking off or messing with electronics. If one of us had to wait to use equipment, we were to wait without goofing around. If the weed whacker's spool runs out, tell a parent so it can be replaced. Don't waste weed whacker line by extending too much unnecessarily. Never unplug the weed whacker while it's running. Do not damage the invisible fence wire. Daniel and I were trained in how to use the equipment, and we initially agreed to switch off each week. One of us would mow while the other edged the lawn using the weed whacker. Both jobs were tedious, but mowing was slightly easier because it didn't involve as much bending. We swapped those tasks weekly without issue until Daniel decided one day that he didn't want to swap anymore. He went to Mom, complained, and as usual, got his way. Mom announced that from now on, we'd each be responsible for either the entire front yard or the entire backyard, including edging. I added that we still needed to rotate yards every week, and she didn't argue at the time. We lived at the end of a cul-de-sac in military housing, which meant our front yard was significantly smaller than the backyard. The front could be done in 20 minutes, while the backyard with its awkward shape and larger size took closer to an hour. Knowing Daniel's lazy tendencies, I suspected he'd try to claim the easier job for himself. And sure enough, after just 2 weeks of the new arrangement, he realized how much more effort the backyard took and decided he only wanted to do the front. He threw a tantrum to get his way, and just like always he got it. Being the golden child had its perks, and this was just another example. I went to Dad about the unfairness, but the only compromise I got for being stuck with the backyard every time was that Daniel had to clean up after our dog every other week. No negotiation. Dad also ruled that whoever got to the front yard first got to do it, making the easier job a competition. And trust me, the competition was intense. I used Daniel's laziness and obsession with video games to beat him to the front yard more often than not. He, on the other hand, resorted to tactics that risked damaging the mower just to secure the yard he wanted, leaving me to fix the messes he caused the week before. What kinds of messes, you ask? Let's start with the gas tank. One key rule was that if you emptied the refill tank, you had to ask a parent for money and walk 5 minutes to the nearest gas station to refill it. Daniel would often use up the last of the gas and simply ignore that one job. Either he outright refused to ask for the money, or he claimed he'd do it later and then conveniently forgot. So guess who got partway through mowing the front yard before the motor sputtered and died? Me, most of the time. A tank that's almost empty might get you through the front yard, but it wouldn't even scratch the surface of the backyard. According to Mom, that was my fault for not checking the gas before starting. And if Daniel got a head start on edging the front yard while I was left refueling because of his negligence, also my problem, apparently. I hated dealing with Daniel, not just because he was lazy, but because he knew better. But just like my disability, remembering basic responsibilities like refueling the gas was a minor detail he couldn't be bothered with. His words exactly. If you're wondering how something as simple as forgetting to refill a gas tank could cause such a delay, just remember, Hollywood's take on gasoline explosions isn't far off. Pouring gas into a hot engine can cause a fire or explosion. And because an explosion could potentially leave me blind, I took safety very seriously. That meant I routinely had to wait an extra 15 minutes for the engine to cool down before I could safely refuel and resume mowing. Eventually, I gave up trying to fight for equal treatment from Mom. Daniel was always going to get away with being a lazy pile of crap, and I was always going to get punished for even thinking about calling him out. So I leaned into it. I started taking my sweet time with the weed whacker, especially since Daniel's childish antics often left behind messes from the week before. If I waited long enough, he'd have to clean up his own mess before I started. Meanwhile, I made sure the backyard was done perfectly because if anything was out of place, I'd catch hell from Mom. This was how it always went with chores involving Daniel. A cold war of minimal effort. He tried to do less and push the burden onto me. I did just enough to protect myself from consequences while exposing him when I could. And Mom, she always sided with Daniel. According to her, her disabled daughter was just being entitled and trying to bully her poor, innocent younger brother into doing more than his fair share. Several new rules were introduced as a result of our constant sibling warfare, from Daniel taking 3-hour breaks between tasks to clear just one more dungeon, to him burning through the entire backup spool of weed whacker wire while Dad was deployed. One time, he tried to get back at me by not emptying the mower's clipping bag the week before. But I was one step ahead. I grabbed the weed whacker and let him deal with the consequences himself, watching as he realized the mess he'd made. Daniel tried to avoid cleanup by mowing without the clipping bag attached, hoping no one would notice. Unfortunately for him, the bag was already full of dried, moldy, and foul-smelling grass clippings, so skipping it created a huge mess. As a result, he had to sweep the street and rake the lawn to gather every last blade of grass. On top of that, he still had to empty the clipping bag. Watching him scoop out the old, rotting clippings with his bare hands and dump them into the compost bin along with the fresh ones was chef's kiss pure satisfaction. I savored every second of his misery. To avoid the constant gas tank sabotage, I made it a point to call Dad every Sunday when we were scheduled to mow. That way, Dad could stay and watch and catch Daniel in the act of emptying the refill can, then immediately hand him a $5 bill and send him down the street with the red gas can. Dad would just smile as Daniel stomped away, grumbling about how I was a tattletale. But honestly, if Daniel hadn't been so obsessed with video games and had just done his chores properly, none of this would have been necessary. Daniel constantly acted like he was being unfairly burdened, despite the fact that he was only being asked to do the bare minimum. In the summer, when the grass grew faster and required more upkeep, Mom finally gave him an extra chore to balance his workload against mine. I say balance, but let's be real. Watering a few potted plants on the back patio with a garden hose took 5 minutes, max 10 if you messed around. Meanwhile, my backyard duties took over an hour if I wasn't being sabotaged by Daniel or pulled away by Mom for something else. Daniel loathed the new watering chore and quickly figured that if he oversprayed and drenched everything, Mom would believe he was incompetent and excuse him. He tried to make it seem like he was wasting water, an especially big deal in Southern California, where conservation is crucial. But neither of our parents gave in. Every time he killed one of Mom's plants with his accidental overwatering, he got a spanking even as a middle schooler and was dragged back to the garden center to buy a replacement. Usually, I had to come too so Dad could also grab a new sprinkler head, another casualty of Daniel's laziness. Somehow, that ended up being my fault too. If you've never mowed a lawn before, here's a fun fact. Wet grass lays flat and doesn't get cut evenly, which means the job gets harder and the results look worse. Daniel, of course, knew this and would intentionally soak a 10-foot swath of the backyard whenever he had to water the plants. At first, I just avoided the wet area and came back to mow it once it had dried, because wet clippings stuck to my legs and made me itch like crazy. Daniel didn't like that I was working around his sabotage and made a point of telling Mom that I wasn't mowing the whole yard at once. That's when I learned about the uneven cutting that happens when you mow wet grass and why waiting for it to dry was the only real option. But my explanations were ignored. Mom sided with Daniel, as usual. She screamed at me, took away my phone privileges and access to the school-owned computer I needed for homework for an entire week, while Daniel lounged in his room, playing his Game Boy between mowing and edging. Until, that is, I finally ruined that for him too. This went on all summer. Every time I asked Daniel not to overspray because it interfered with my mowing, he'd just glare at me and do it anyway. He'd claim it was an accident or say he was just playing with the dog. Eventually, Dad noticed me avoiding the wet areas and asked why. So I spilled the tea. After that, a new rule was set. If Daniel soaked any part of the backyard while watering Mom's plants, he had to mow that section. Miraculously, he became an expert with the hose almost overnight. No more drowned plants, no more replacement runs to the nursery. Funny how that works. He still hated waiting on me to finish with whatever tool I was using, and his entitled attitude only got worse. At one point, he decided he was done waiting altogether. I remember this moment vividly because it led to one of the dumbest rule changes ever added to the chore list. For context, our weed whacker was electric, plugged into the wall via a super long extension cord wound on a reel. The outdoor outlets had those plastic weatherproof covers to protect them from rain. That day, I was outside, peacefully weed whacking, bent over awkwardly as I worked the tool. I was about a quarter of the way through the job when Daniel finished mowing the front yard. And because of the rule about no messing with electronics while someone else was using them, he knew he had to wait until I was done, probably another 20 minutes or so. But Daniel must have had a play date or a new video game waiting, because this time, instead of waiting, he walked up and yanked the cord out of the outlet from about 3 feet away. Needless to say, yanking a live cord is bad for the health of any electronic device. Startled, I turned around, expecting it to be Mom about to hound me again. Instead, it was Daniel. Me, what does Mom want now? Daniel, I want to edge now. Give me the whacker. Me, that's a hard no. I'm not finished. You'll have to wait. Daniel, but I don't want to wait. It won't take long. You'd be back at your yard before Mom even notices. Me, that's a lie and you know it. Mom's probably already on her way to check your plant watering. Daniel started getting angry. He hated that I wasn't backing down, even though I was older by over a year. He stalked toward me, gripping the damaged end of the cord. Daniel, I'm edging now. I'm sick of sitting around waiting for you to finish. Me, then maybe you should have thought about that before you got the rules changed to suit your lazy butt. If it's not a rule, you can kiss my ass. Daniel's face turned beet red. He raised the cord like a flail. I noticed the plug was mangled, bent at a weird angle with copper strands poking out in all directions. I have no doubt that he would have swung it at me. He's always had aggression issues and resorts to violence instead of talking things out like a normal person. I screamed for Mom. She was not pleased when she saw the state of the plug. It was halfway ripped off. The incident led to a brand new rule. No one was allowed to unplug the weed whacker while someone was using it. I insisted this rule apply to Mom too, not that it helped. In the end, I lost my phone and school computer privileges for a week for calling Daniel a pig. He lost his gaming privileges for 3 days for ruining the extension cord. Dad had to buy a new plug and attach it himself. This was in the early 2000s, right around the time we moved out of military housing and started renting a place in another part of town. Not long after, Dad landed a contractor job, so we could afford the rising cost of living in the area. Meanwhile, Mom chased down every discount she could find, and having us do our own yard work was one of the ways we cut costs. The new house wasn't in a cul-de-sac, which I was grateful for. At some point before we moved in, the homeowner had enclosed the original back patio to make an extra room and extended the patio into part of the backyard. As a result, the backyard was smaller than the front yard, but I was so used to doing the backyard that I didn't question it. Once Daniel realized this, he threw a full-blown man-child tantrum to Mom, who demanded to know why I hadn't offered to swap yards with him so he could occasionally have the smaller one. Honestly, it hadn't even occurred to me we hadn't swapped yards in years. Just like when we were younger, every time we were supposed to swap, Daniel would throw a fit, and things would revert back to the way they'd always been. Him permanently having the smaller yard, which took about 30 minutes, and me stuck with the larger one, which took around 40. By then, we had upgraded to a new electric mower, so at least the gaskin battles were over. But the fight over the clipping bag continued. I didn't really care anymore. It was just a chore to be done, and I'd long since given up trying to win that war. That was, until one summer, when Daniel discovered a beehive, or maybe a wasp nest growing under the awning in the backyard. That day, he suddenly decided to generously offer to swap yards with me. I was immediately suspicious and told him to shove off, going about my work in the front yard. No more than 3 minutes later, Mom came out, digging her nails into my arm and berating me for being so selfish. According to her, I had made such a fuss about wanting to swap yards that I should have been grateful Daniel was finally offering. Never mind that we hadn't even argued about it in over 5 years unless she was projecting his tantrums onto me. I don't know where she got that idea. Just wanting her to stop leaving permanent indentations in my elbow. I relented and went to work in the backyard. There were more bugs buzzing around my head than usual, but I didn't think much of it until Dad came outside to check on the grill. He spotted me standing directly under the growing nest and freaked out. I didn't get stung, but Dad dragged me off the mower and into the house, yelling for someone to call property management to get pest control out immediately. When Mom saw the size of the nest, She panicked too, but she never apologized for putting me in danger because of Daniel's behavior. Daniel didn't apologize either, even after admitting he had seen the nest, and that was exactly why he'd wanted to swap. He didn't think it was a big deal to send his older sister over there without saying a word. We were all furious. And for the first time in forever, Mom finally enforced yard swapping duties after the exterminators came and got rid of the nest. Of course, after I moved out, I was beyond relieved to never have to touch a mower again. I even told Dad that I'd be happy to hear about all the trouble Daniel might get himself in now that he no longer had anyone else to blame for his problems when it came to lawn work. But it turns out that despite all the years we did the lawn work that earned Mom and Dad a rent discount since property management didn't have to arrange for landscapers, Daniel was completely spared from yard work. Instead of stepping up, he was coddled yet again. It stung to realize that even after all the years I'd been put at risk, whether it was merely getting stung by bees, the threat of blindness from mishandling gasoline, the money lost replacing broken sprinklers, and the invisible fence needed to contain the dog, or just the sheer emotional and mental toll of being treated as the lesser sibling, Daniel was never held accountable the way I was. Apparently, it was easier for them to just pay full rent than to make the only stay-at-home child pick up the new electric mower and do the work that would have preserved the discount. I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed and deeply hurt. Daniel always got his way. I'm just glad I don't have to deal with any of that anymore. My entitled mother gets aggressive with wheelchairs. So, if you've noticed a pattern, my stories about my mom often come in two parts. Thankfully, this gap was just a year, not decades. This incident began when I was 17 and still in high school, and the second part happened when I was 18. It started with a Ford F-150 owned by a company that worked on both sides of the border, but was only insured in Mexico, blowing through a red light near my high school at over 40 miles per hour without even slowing down. The truck sped along past the elementary school across the street and didn't hit the brakes until it reached my intersection. They realized too late there was a problem. Miraculously, the driver managed to squeeze between the second and third cars during a protected turn cycle, but they still hit me. It could have been much worse. I could have ended up under 3 cars worth of twisted metal. Instead, I took an unplanned 15-foot flying lesson no glider, included, followed by a pavement bodyboarding session for another 20 feet. As bad as that was, I got off relatively easy. My femur broke straight across at bumper height. My 2 front teeth were shattered down to the roots, a neighboring tooth chipped, and I lost some skin here and there. I was confined to a wheelchair for a long time, and every movement hurt. My mom, controlling, narcissistic, and entitled, halted all her volunteer work to take care of her now even more disabled daughter. This happened 20 years ago, so some of the details are fuzzy, but I clearly remember that during one of my regular checkups, the doctor said I could start doing some normal activities again and leave the house. I told him I wanted to go back to school, even if just for one class. I missed my friends and desperately wanted to socialize. I felt like I was climbing the walls, figuratively speaking, because I couldn't escape my mom. She had complete control of the TV and made me watch whatever she wanted. After my Nana accused her of not caring for me during the divorce, she went on a campaign, forcing me to sit through a non-stop parade of shows, all reinforcing her new agenda. There were endless episodes of women being dumped by men who had gotten them pregnant, stories of teen moms expecting their families to support them, Dateline exposés, and dramas about women being taken advantage of. Her goal was clear: men are evil and only want sex. Women are helpless victims. And I had no way out. I was too young to fully articulate what I was feeling, but I knew I was drawing attention, and all I wanted was my normal life back, to spend time with my friends. So, I focused on counting the days between doctor's visits, doing my best to follow instructions and stay on track with my recovery. When the doctor finally gave me the green light to attend school for a few hours, I chose my favorite class, AP Biology. It was where I first learned my blood type. Getting to school in a wheelchair, though, was a whole new challenge. I didn't yet have the arm strength to cover the quarter to half-mile distance alone, so Mom had to push me. That's when I first noticed a problem, one that only got worse with time, as things often do when it comes to me. Passing the intersection where I'd been hit felt strange, but manageable. The real issue was the 4-lane T intersection in front of my high school, which also had a turning lane. The road was in terrible shape, and drivers routinely ignored the traffic signals, especially since the light was relatively new. Mom would rush me across the street, and everything was fine until we hit the center hump. From there, going downhill, she picked up speed, and I felt like I was about to be launched out of the chair. What amazed me even more was that she could still run like that despite always complaining about her foot pain. I clung to the wheelchair like my life depended on it, but said nothing. She never listened anyway, and I didn't want to risk losing the only time I had away from her by seeming ungrateful. The next day was just as terrifying, and again I held on silently. By the third day, I finally asked Mom politely not to go so fast, explaining that it made me feel unsafe. On the fourth day, I nearly lost my new glasses, saved only by the neck strap. This time, I told her directly to slow down, since being polite clearly wasn't enough. Her response: "The drivers here don't respect anyone. If you want to make it to your class, you need to cross fast. Until you can push yourself, you're going to have to accept it. You don't want to end up back in the hospital, do you?" This went on for a full week while I worked hard to build up my strength at home. By the second week of returning to class, a few things changed. I'd been gaining mobility and could get around the house more on my own. I wanted my independence back, especially for Mom, who loved parading me around whenever she went anywhere, with Dad off at work on base doing whatever enlisted duties required. I was tired of feeling dread every time we approached a street, afraid of what she might do if she got annoyed while I was stuck in a seated position, completely dependent on her. Then things escalated. One day, a jacket I had folded in my lap bounced off and landed in the crosswalk as she rushed me across the street. Several cars ran it over before the light changed, and she could retrieve it, and she only did so begrudgingly. The hoodie was ruined and had to be thrown away, but she used the incident to justify her behavior, claiming it proved she had every right to keep pushing me at unsafe speeds. One day, while we were just crossing another street, my injured leg, which was in a brace, got jostled out of its support. I instinctively hit the brake on one wheel so I could adjust my leg and get it back into place. For that, I got scolded for using the brakes mid-crossing and not being more careful with my hurt leg. We were going over trolley tracks, so I still don't know what exactly I could have done differently. I'd had enough. The next day, as Mom pushed me toward the same intersection with the same reckless speed, I waited until we hit the high point in the street. Then I gently applied the brakes, just enough to slow the chair down, without forcing a stop, hoping she'd finally get the message. I had already asked her, more than once, to slow down because the way she was pushing me made me feel unsafe. Of course, she didn't listen and actually tried to speed up the moment I eased up. So I applied the brakes again, keeping a pace I felt safe with. I felt her body bump into the back of my chair as she walked into it, but we still crossed the street in the same amount of time, without unnecessary pain or panic on my part. Can't say the same for her. She was putting off a much-needed surgery because recovery meant relying on others to drive her for 3 months, but that's a story for another time. This pattern repeated for 3 more days. Then she'd had enough of me enforcing my will with what she called tactical braking. "You don't seem to take this seriously, and you think you have every right to use those brakes," she snapped. "You're getting yourself to school from now on, without any help." Of course, she made sure to huff and puff and play the poor, suffering mother on the phone that day, telling her few remaining friends after her usual address book purge that her ungrateful daughter was just impossible. This always happened whenever someone challenged her. She would throw a dramatic fit and revoke whatever help or benefit she had been offering. She'd never let me try to push myself to school before. But now, her tantrum had finally given me the opportunity to prove I could. It was hard, really hard. But every time she pretended to be sweet or commented on how tough it must be for me and that I'd be better off letting her help, I found a little more strength to keep going. I got blisters and calluses. My arms felt like limp noodles, aching in that satisfying way that meant I was getting stronger. I was late to class for a while, and even though she wasn't pushing me, she still followed close behind. In that strange, twisted way some toxic parents do, she did care, just not in a healthy or helpful way. She loved control more than actual support. Eventually, after crossing the hump in the road by school, I noticed something odd. My chair dipped forward too suddenly as I coasted toward the sidewalk. I looked back and saw that Mom had planted her feet on the back bar of my wheelchair and was holding onto the handlebars not to help me, but to hitch a ride so she didn't have to walk the whole distance herself. All the while, she smiled and waved to passing drivers like everything was normal. She kept doing this every day. That's when I started teaching myself to turn corners using just the brakes. So, the increased speed from Mom's added weight on the wheelchair didn't bother me much, but it was another situation where I didn't really know how to react. I wish I could say these uncomfortable incidents only happened near our house, but unfortunately, she pulled similar stunts at a wholesale store and even at an amusement park. That particular park incident involved a whole other mess where the wheelchair was stolen and Reddit's filters don't seem to like that story. Things got worse in crowded areas like amusement parks, the beach, theaters, or grocery stores on a Sunday. Once I reached that awkward middle stage of recovery, able to walk short distances on crutches, but still needing the wheelchair for anything longer, her behavior started to shift in public. As my healing progressed, and I regained full range of motion in my knee, I could sit more comfortably without my leg jutting straight out, which I was initially glad about. But soon, I noticed something else. When Mom was in control of the wheelchair, I began bumping into people a lot more. I thought it was accidental at first, but the frequency made it hard to believe. I'd be pushed into people's calves without warning, making them yelp and turn around in surprise. She shoved us through crowds like we were part of a fast and furious chase scene. I started to realize I was just a tool to her. A way to cut lines, force people out of the way, and make things move faster because her foot was hurt. The resentment built up quickly. Every dirty look from strangers landed on me, not her, even though she was the one pushing. Once I graduated to using only a cane, I swore I'd never let anyone else push me in a wheelchair again. About a year later, my family planned a trip to an amusement park, the one from the commercials with the dancing old guy, and I invited my best friend Bubbles. I now regret that she had to become part of this story. While we were at the park, Bubbles twisted her ankle. Mom, Dad, and I all agreed we'd take her home, even though it meant a 4-hour drive in traffic. But Bubbles was adamant. It was the last day of a long weekend. She insisted it was just a twist, and she didn't want to leave early. So we rented a park wheelchair, and I felt that old dread creeping back up. I hovered close out of genuine concern for Bubbles, but also out of fear about what Mom might do. I didn't care that I still needed a cane. I had a mission now. I did everything I could to make sure I was the one pushing Bubbles. If Mom had to do it, it was only on flat ground where her aggressive instincts wouldn't kick in. The only hiccup was when we wanted to go on one of those circular river rides that hold about a dozen people per boat. The ride was barely wheelchair accessible, but we both wanted to try it. At the end of the day, the crowd exiting the park was thick like gym class soup. I had a white-knuckle grip on the wheelchair's handlebars, guiding Bubbles carefully. She was tired, in pain, and moving slow. Mom was limping too, and I started to feel that familiar sense of dread. Something about her expression made the hairs on my neck stand up. "Move over, Abraxas, you're too slow," she barked. Then came the elbow to my ribs. She yanked the chair around, pried my hands off the handles, and took over. To top it off, my ever-entitled brother Daniel chimed in with a useless, "Just let Mom push." I could only watch as Mom shoved the wheelchair forward, ramming it into the calves and ankles of the people ahead of us. All she got in response were dirty looks and people scrambling to get out of her way. Those metal footrests hurt if you're not wearing the right shoes. Bubbles turned in her seat, and there I was, right beside her. One more glance, and she saw who was in control of her fate. We were trapped in a packed crowd, and Mom, aggressive as ever, was in charge of the wheelchair. I couldn't tell who felt worse, Bubbles or me. She looked scared, and I was miserable, knowing I was powerless to help her. I'd seen what Mom could do, but even then, I wasn't ready for this. A gap had opened in front of us thanks to Mom's reckless pushing, and a young kid stepped into the open space while holding a parent's hand. Mom didn't like that, just like she used to with me. She leaned over Bubbles and shoved the child forward hard into their parents' legs, moving the wheelchair several feet in one aggressive thrust. To me, it looked like she backhanded the kid. Bubbles insists it was more of a rough shove, but either way, it was unacceptable. I had told Bubbles over the phone about the punishments, the lies, the narcissism, and entitlement. It probably sounded like typical teenage complaints about strict parents, but now here it was, blatant, physical aggression towards someone else's child, with zero concern for anyone around her. I think I tried to regain control of the wheelchair, but Mom was determined to treat it and its occupant like a battering ram, just a tool to get off her own aching feet and back to the car faster. Both Bubbles and I were appalled, but there was nothing we could do. We endured the glares, the whispered insults, and the curses until we finally reached the rental office. Without the wheelchair, Bubbles couldn't make it to the car. I insisted on sitting with her while the rest of the family went to help Mom. It was a cold night outside the park gates, and a staff member stood nearby, ready to take the chair back inside so it wouldn't be stolen. "I'm sorry, Bubbles," I said quietly. I knew Mom would pull something, but I didn't think she'd actually shove a kid. She's done stuff like this before back when I was the one in the chair. That's why I tried so hard to be there for you, to push you around, to make sure you felt safe despite everything. I didn't want you to be scared just because your ankle's swollen." She stayed silent. I sat there, burning with helpless anger. All I'd wanted was one holiday weekend, just 4 days out of the year where Mom could keep it together. One short stretch of time to act like the perfect parent she always pretended to be in public, like she did during the hours I spent at events at the Blind WCK Center. I didn't care that she was in pain. It was her own fault, for her own reckless decisions. She always claimed to know better, but even I knew not to do anything like what she'd just done. My mom gets offended that an artist dared to sell art to my dad. Sorry for the gap between stories. This one took some time to get from Dad, and it happened after he retired from the Navy. I believe it was around 2012 when their marriage became rockier than I'd ever seen before. Mom always loved to complain and painted herself as morally superior because she preferred discussion over arguments. I found that pretty ironic, considering all she ever did at home was argue with Dad and constantly tried to turn me against him by pointing out his flaws, which were often just coping mechanisms he'd developed to deal with her over the years. We met an artist, let's call her Ella, at a local art show. Our relationship with her started when my brother Daniel became unusually captivated by one of her pieces. He'd never shown much interest in art before, but he was clearly taken with her mosaic glasswork. Each of her pieces was handmade, one of a kind, and stunning because of the unique textures and color blends. Mom didn't want to spend over $100 on something she thought Daniel might lose interest in after 15 minutes, but she said we could come back later if he still wanted it. Near the end of the show, we returned only to find the piece had already sold. Daniel was visibly disappointed and sulked for the rest of the day. What we didn't know at the time was that Ella had contacted my parents afterward. She offered to make a similar piece using the same kinds of glass and incorporating the elements Daniel had been drawn to. She said she'd never seen a young man so genuinely moved by her work and wanted to nurture that relationship with art. Daniel still loves that piece. He dusts it, admires it, and smiles every time he sees it. That became the beginning of a tradition. Whenever we saw Ella at art shows around the state, we'd get a new piece. Over time, we got to know her well, and she was excited to tell us she'd soon be opening a permanent gallery in a community known for its vibrant art scene and steady flow of tourists and locals alike. She also mentioned plans to launch an online store so she could reach more customers. That online store would eventually become the source of one of Mom's infamous meltdowns. Around this time, Dad had just weathered a company merger and managed to keep his job under a new boss. He even got a bigger office. Thinking about how to personalize his space, he remembered Ella's work and decided to purchase a piece from her online shop, something about the size of a standard store-bought canvas. He listed his office address for delivery and thought nothing more of it. He received an invoice and was told he'd get a tracking number once the item shipped. That should have been the end of the story. Unfortunately, Ella's website experienced a glitch. While she was able to recover the names of customers, especially repeat buyers like us, and some email addresses, she lost the shipping address data. The piece Dad ordered ended up being sent to our home address by default. Ella then sent an email to Mom with the tracking number, assuming it was still her contact info. Mom lost her mind. She confronted Dad the moment he got home, accusing him of trying to hide something. There was a lot of yelling. Dad tried to explain that it wasn't for a coworker or a lady friend, it was just a piece for his new office. Mom didn't believe him. She insisted he was lying and declared she was going to return the piece the second it arrived. Dad had to contact Ella himself to ask what happened with the shipping address and to request the tracking number because Mom absolutely refused to hand it over. And at the time, I thought that was the end of the story. I moved out shortly afterward, but apparently, Dad had to take the day off work on the day the artwork was scheduled to arrive just to prevent Mom from following through on her threat, or worse. The fact that Dad was purchasing custom art for an office space she would never see, meaning the items were beyond her ability to use as leverage or destroy during one of her tantrums, was truly intolerable to her. So she packed herself into her Subaru and drove several hours through rush hour traffic to Ella's new gallery, which had recently opened out of town. Unfortunately, Ella happened to be in that day. Mom confronted her, this petite woman, for daring to sell her own artwork to a paying customer. And knowing my mom, she definitely got in Ella's face, her southern drawl slipping out as it always did when she got heated. Ella, being a polite and reserved woman with a European accent and, due to past trauma, a much larger than average personal space bubble, was likely horrified. She probably kept sidestepping to preserve her space while Mom loomed over her, likely raising her voice. The gallery's co-owner, Ella's close friend, was eventually called in, and security had to escort Mom out. She was banned from returning. Ever since that day, Mom has had nothing nice to say about Ella, despite once getting along with her quite well. She even went so far as to try and push Ella out of mutual social circles. Meanwhile, Dad has continued to purchase more of Ella's artwork for his office and has maintained a friendly relationship with her. Ella had even considered pursuing a restraining order against Mom at one point, though she ultimately didn't go through with it. Ella felt awful for sending the artwork to the wrong address and explained the situation to Dad, who was very understanding about the lost data. But I feel terrible for Ella. I hadn't known the full extent of what happened until much later. Especially considering that, after persistent persuasion from Mom, Ella had sold her very first piece of mosaic glass artwork to her. That piece, a collaborative effort between Ella and her father who passed away years later, was incredibly special. It was tied to the happiest memories of her childhood. Ella had hoped Dad would ask for that piece in the divorce, feeling he deserved it. But Dad, being the bigger person, let Mom keep it. My little brother is an entitled golden child. Some of the details in this next part may be difficult or triggering to some, and I apologize, it wasn't easy for me to live through either. I escaped that mess of a household in 2013. Daniel, on the other hand, still lives at home with Mom where he belongs. Frankly, that's always been the life he's chosen, and I take a little comfort in knowing I rarely have to see them. If you've read my previous stories, you've seen me refer to my younger brother Daniel, 18 months younger, as entitled, though I haven't gone into much detail yet outside of incidents that could be dismissed as typical sibling rivalry. But I can tell you from having lived with him for 27 years and having endured his bullying and abuse for as long as I can remember, it goes way beyond that. The earliest incident I remember involved his strange sleeping habits. He has OCD, so everything had to be just so. At the time, I was either in preschool or kindergarten. Back then, we could still climb into our parents' bed after a nightmare, but after a few months, Mom banned it. That's when Daniel started coming to my room. I agreed, wanting to be a good big sister, but I came to regret it. Daniel's OCD demanded that he sleep in the exact center of the bed, with all the blankets tucked tightly around him so that no moving air could reach his skin. That meant I was pushed to the very edge of my full-size bed, which wasn't exactly comfortable. On cold winter nights in Illinois, I wasn't about to freeze just so he could have every blanket wrapped around him. I was wearing nothing but flannel pajamas and clutching a stuffed animal, and I wasn't willing to go without covers to satisfy his sensitivities. I tried to compromise, suggesting he could use the 2 lower blankets if I could have the top sheet and comforter. But no, he insisted on having all 4 blankets and the flat sheet wrapped around him. He also preferred if I didn't move the bed at all while he was sleeping. We had many whispered arguments that ended one night when he curled up and suddenly kicked me out of my own bed like a goat. The force was so strong that I flew off the mattress and smacked my head against the end table. I must have cried out, because my parents rushed into the room and turned on the light. I was terrified at first. I thought I had gone blind in my good eye, but it turned out to be blood obscuring my vision. My eyebrow had been split open in the fall. After a trip to the hospital to confirm that I wasn't blinded, I refused to let Daniel sleep in my room anymore. His retaliation? He started leaving my bedroom light on all night until I gave in. We were both scolded by Mom not for what he'd done to me, but for being wasteful children who should have known better. That incident wasn't the last time Daniel hurt me, but from then on, every act was calculated and intentional. After Dad got stationed in California in the early 90s, Daniel started showing an interest in tools. One summer, when we visited our grandparents in Texas, he and Papa spent a lot of time together building things, plastic model cars and Navy ships. When Daniel asked about tools, Papa helped him build a simple wooden toolbox and took him to the hardware store to pick up a basic set, including a hammer, a couple of screwdrivers, a hand drill, and another item I can't recall. I wasn't into that stuff, but I thought the projects they were doing were really cool. They even made a birdhouse for our grandparents' backyard. I just wanted to see the process of them assembling the model of the USS Arizona, painting it, and applying the stickers. Daniel, however, didn't want me around and tried to gatekeep the activity. I asked Mom if I could watch them work, and she told me to ask Papa. He didn't mind having an observer, as long as I was respectful and interested. So I sat at the small table next to Daniel to listen, watch, and ask questions. I was fascinated, especially when I learned that a family member, my grandma's sister, had married a man who survived Pearl Harbor. They showed me a sticker on the model with the ship's name, and Papa told me a part of the ship had actually washed up on shore and had been found by this man. I kept asking questions, excited to learn more about this branch of the family I'd never met. That's when Daniel started physically blocking me from seeing around him, even looking over his shoulder to make sure I couldn't see the pieces or stickers like that would somehow stop me from asking about Pearl Harbor and our family's connection to it. Daniel was determined to shut me out. I learned that the colonel and the family couldn't keep the short of the ship, of course, but he had been allowed to keep a photo of it, which I saw years later. Daniel wasn't particularly clever, and once he realized I wasn't going to stop asking questions, he turned and tried to hit me. Papa caught his arm and told him firmly that you don't hit girls. Then he invited me to sit beside him so I could watch the model come together. I wasn't touching the pieces, the paints, or even the stickers. I didn't want to. I just wanted to observe and absorb all the trivia about the ship and our family history. Daniel didn't care for any of that. He had no interest in the background behind his models and clearly resented that I was bonding with Grandpa over it. When we returned home from that trip to Texas, Daniel wasted no time putting his hand drill to work. He had been told it wasn't for casual use and never to be used unsupervised or indoors. But that didn't stop him. He started by drilling holes in the wooden fences around our base housing so he could spy on the neighbors, which got him in immediate trouble. Once he realized he'd get a spanking if Mom was around, he began quietly making shallow quarter or half-inch holes in his own furniture and the baseboards inside our house. He tried to hide the damage under toys and junk to delay the inevitable punishment. When he ran out of spots in his own room, he moved on to mine. I once caught him aligning the drill with pencil marks he had drawn on top of my dresser. I shouted for our parents, furious he was using the drill inside again. He turned on me in rage and swung the drill at my face, striking me just above the eye. The same eye that had already been injured when he kicked me out of bed. We ended up back at the hospital. Thankfully, my glasses deflected the drill bit enough to prevent major damage. The bit gouged a deep line into my lenses and diverted toward my eyebrow, which still bled profusely. This time, I needed stitches. Once we were home, and it was confirmed I hadn't been blinded, the fallout was depressingly familiar. Mom's response was to take the drill away and scream at Daniel not for hurting me, but for damaging government housing. Dad took a firmer stance. He dragged Daniel to Home Depot, bought spackle and paint, and made him patch every hole he drilled in the walls and baseboards. He was grounded for a month. As for the holes in his own furniture, he was forced to live with those since he had damaged them himself. I wasn't even in 3rd grade yet. The rest of elementary and middle school were filled with more scars courtesy of Daniel's violent outbursts. There was the time he sliced the tip off my finger. Times he lied to get out of chores, stole and broke my glasses, and hid my belongings just to blame me until they magically reappeared and he got praised for finding them. He learned how to brown nose expertly, winning over Mom while embarrassing me in public. His punishments were light items taken away briefly, only to be returned. Meanwhile, anything Mom disapproved of in my room was donated or thrown out. He was allowed to let his room reek like urine, staged incidents where I'd trip or get hurt, and then convinced Mom it was my fault, and regularly accused me of being a cow who ate all the food in the house. Because of Daniel, I wasn't allowed to open anything in the kitchen unless it had already been opened. The idea was that he should be the one to open things like my favorite cereal or snacks so he could gorge himself on more than half before anyone else got a chance. Somehow, I was still blamed even if I followed this ridiculous rule, because, of course, Daniel would never eat more than his fair share, unlike me, the so-called fat, blind one. I once caught him picking out all the green, blue, and purple Fruit Loops from the box so he could hoard his favorite colors, then tried to tell me it was a factory defect and those colors had just been missing. Dad and I later discovered bottles of coffee creamer hidden in Daniel's room. He'd been drinking them like chocolate milk because he liked the taste. Mom's response: she grounded him for a week. Another time, I caught him trying to steal fruit pies at the grocery store. When I tried to call him out on it, I got backhanded in public for shaming him while Mom simply returned the pastries to the cashier, saying she wasn't about to buy them. This was around the time Daniel had been prescribed a new medication that caused an increased appetite. Instead of acknowledging the connection between his bloating and food consumption, Mom insisted that I, the skinny one, was the real problem, a voracious black hole, unfairly blaming her poor son. It wasn't until the coffee creamer incident that the absurd no opening boxes or bottles rule was finally lifted. But no one apologized. Not Daniel, for constantly framing me as the bad guy. Not Mom, who treated me like the villain the entire time he was grounded. And since Daniel was always brown-nosing for her attention, she defended even his worst behavior as long as he didn't curse. He was allowed to call me anything he wanted. He dismissed all the precautions we had to take for my vision, like my glasses, or people announcing themselves if approaching from my blind side, as meaningless. He said I was worthless, that none of it mattered, and that no one cared about me. His foul mouth always got worse after my doctor's appointments, my vision checkups, or any time I got new glasses. When Mom enrolled both of us in adolescent therapy, the counselor actually suggested that Daniel's behavior might stem from jealousy over the attention I received for my vision problems. As if both of us didn't have ADHD. As if the issue was me resenting him for always getting the electronics first, while I had to wait. Therapy told me I had to be the bigger person, not retaliate. That Daniel's emotional immaturity meant he lashed out for attention. Meanwhile, I was prescribed sleep medication because I woke up terrified that he'd destroy or steal my things. I was put on antidepressants because I showed signs of depression before I was even a teenager, on top of the medication for ADHD. What exactly did Daniel have to be jealous of? That I had painful eye drops forced into my eyes every few months? That I got picked on for wearing glasses? That I ended up in the hospital because of his violence? Why was I the one seen as the problem? I wasn't some menial detail like he claimed I was. He didn't even know what the word meant, he just thought it sounded impressive. He was raised knowing better than to hit girls, but he still came at me from my blind side regularly with hit-and-run attacks, and Mom let him get away with it. Later on, he stuck to being obstinate, which I kind of was too, but only after I realized my mom was a terrible parent who just wanted to mistreat me for not being a mindless parrot like Daniel. I was in middle school then, maxed out on my antidepressant dosage appropriate for my height and weight. Daniel was also violent and aggressive when it came to video games. He absolutely had to win. We used to go to the rec center on base where you could trade in a military ID for an hour on an N64 or a computer or other activities. We played games like Kirby, Smash Brothers, or Pokemon. My vision quickly became a serious problem. If there was too much movement or not enough contrast, I couldn't see my character. In Smash Brothers, I stopped touching the controller because I couldn't keep track of my character. Daniel always picked a character that blended into the stage and ran around, moving the camera so I couldn't react before he knocked me off the stage repeatedly. I eventually refused to play that game anymore, which made him cry to Mom. That led us to playing Pokemon instead, where we were supposed to learn, share, and play together. According to Mom, I was being a selfish brat for not wanting to do that with Daniel. But in the Pokemon game, Daniel ignored my questions about what each Pokemon did, why they were different, what the types meant, and why we had to pick 6 at the start. At first, I chose the ones I liked the look of and got wiped out. Then I noticed he kept swapping out his team whenever one of mine came out, so I started doing the same. I could see the game clearly, but Daniel was purposely keeping me in the dark about the mechanics so he could get cheap wins to brag about like it meant anything outside the game. Since the Pokemon show and trading card game were all the rage, between visits to the rec center, I had to ask other kids in the neighborhood and at school for information to catch up. Eventually, I developed a strategy to beat the living daylights out of Daniel's team, which all hinged on Chansey being a damaged sponge and hitting it with the right moves. Daniel got mad when he realized I'd figured him out. He lied about agreeing not to use his pink tank and tried to hit me every time I picked a counter to his trick. When that failed, he pretended he wasn't going to use it and switched it out to get his meaningless victory again. But I caught on to his tactics, and they stopped working, which made him furious. The mama's boy ran crying to Mom, claiming I wasn't playing fair. She watched us play together, where he never actually chose his tank character, but hovered over it. I always picked the kickboxer. If he wanted to play a stupid game in front of Mom, I was going to shame him by being a damn winner. Mom saw nothing wrong with this, and was glad I wasn't whining about having to play with my brother. This Cold War went on until I got Dad involved at the rec center, and showed him how to take down the pink tank whenever Daniel tried sneaking it in. Dad thought it was fun and said I was a great teacher. After that, Daniel refused to play with me anymore. The same thing happened when we eventually got a PS2 and played Digimon Rumble Arena. I learned that Gatoman was powerful, and Suraymon was Daniel's go-to for cheap wins. Our time playing Rumble Arena ended just like it did with Brawl. All I really wanted at the rec center was to play with my Neopets, not fight with my brother. We didn't get the PS2 until middle school, and it was a Christmas gift for Daniel. We were expected to share the console, games, controllers, and memory cards. On paper, this was fine if he wasn't such a control freak about winning. Even though it was his gift, Mom put the console in the living room. At first, I had to ask Daniel for permission to play anything, which he almost never gave. I ended up asking Mom every day for permission. She'd send me back to Daniel, and I'd come back to Mom, who'd send me back again. Daniel threw tantrums whenever I went over his head. Back then, games only had a few save files, and I was careful to use a different slot so I wouldn't erase his progress. But eventually, I had to use the last save slot because the others were being deleted or overwritten by him, which sent me back to square one almost daily. I told Mom about it, but she just brushed it off, saying the constant restarting would help me get better and that Daniel didn't mean to be malicious. I watched him scan the memory card for any save files that weren't his and delete or overwrite them, then say I couldn't play that game again until he cleared a tough section which required him to wipe out every save file available. When I tried to protect my save file with that excuse, Mom would backhand me. All the while, I watched Daniel repeatedly set me back because it was his console, his games, and his memory card. Eventually, Dad had enough. We went to the Navy exchange and bought me a yellow memory card, so it wouldn't get confused with Daniel's red one. I used my card to save my progress and realized Daniel wouldn't like losing control over that power. I kept my memory card with me at all times, afraid he'd come looking for it. After just a week and a half of freedom from his deleting and overwriting, Daniel tore through my room while Mom was out at the commissary to find it. I caught him, and we fought right there in my room until Dad stepped in and put us both in timeout until Mom came home. Mom didn't understand why we were still fighting over save files when I had my own memory card now. Daniel made up a tall tale about maxing out his memory card and needing to use mine to continue playing one of his games. If it weren't for Dad, Mom would have believed that rotten sack of lies like it was the last bag of chocolate in the world and forced me to hand mine over. Dad pointed out that we had fewer than 10 games and each of us had a 16 gigabytes memory card, so it was physically impossible for Daniel to have filled his card, even if he used every save slot in every game we owned. When it came time to prove it, It turned out Daniel had plenty of space left on his card, and yet he walked away without any punishment. Meanwhile, I was grounded for starting a fight with my brother in my own bedroom. Thanks, Mom. My little brother is an entitled golden child, part 2. If you've read my other stories, you might have heard me mention my little brother Daniel, who is 18 months younger. He's entitled not just in a casual way you might brush off as typical sibling rivalry, but truly so, based on 27 years of living with him and enduring his abuse and bullying. The first incident I remember involved his strange sleeping habits. Daniel has OCD and needed everything just so. When I was in preschool or kindergarten, we still managed to climb into bed with our parents after nightmares. But after a few months, Mom forbade it. That's when Daniel started coming to my room. Being the good big sister, I agreed, but I soon regretted it. Daniel's OCD meant he had to be in the exact center of the bed, with blankets tucked tightly around him so no moving air could touch him. That meant I being on the edge of my full-size bed wasn't good enough. When I lifted the blankets, and since it was winter, I wasn't about to give up my warmth just to satisfy his need for control. We lived in Illinois, and winters weren't kind, only flannel pajamas and a stuffy room kept the cold at bay. I tried to compromise, offering him the 2 lower blankets if I could have the upper blanket and comforter. But he insisted on having all 4 blankets tucked tightly around him with a flat sheet, and he also wanted me not to wiggle the bed while he slept. Our arguments over this escalated until one night, he kicked me out of my own bed with such force that my head hit the end table. I must have cried out because my parents were there immediately, lights on. I was terrified Daniel had blinded me since I couldn't see out of my good eye, but it turned out blood had just gotten into it from the cut on my eyebrow. He tried once more to come into my room after a nightmare sometime later, but after my hospital visit confirmed I wasn't blinded, I refused to let him sleep with me again. In retaliation, he would leave my bedroom light on all night until I let him in. We both got lectured by Mom for being wasteful kids who should know better. This wasn't the only time Daniel hurt me, but every injury after that was intentional and calculated. After Dad was stationed in California in the early 90s, Daniel developed an interest in tools. One summer, when we visited our grandparents in Texas, Papa and Daniel did a lot together, like making plastic models of cars and Navy ships. When Daniel asked about tools, they made a simple wooden toolkit and even went to the hardware store to pick out a basic set of tools. They had the usual tools: a hammer, 2 screwdrivers, a hand drill, and something else I can't quite remember. I wasn't interested in any of it at the time, but that drill would later become a major problem for me. They also built a pretty cool birdhouse for our grandparents' backyard. What I really wanted was to watch them assemble a replica of the USS Arizona, painting it and applying the stickers. Daniel enjoyed this activity and tried to keep it to himself. I asked Mom if I could watch them, and she told me to ask Papa. Papa was okay with me observing since I was genuinely interested. So, I sat at the small table next to my brother, watching, listening, and asking questions. The box they were working from caught my attention, and I learned that a relative of my grandma's sister had married a man who survived Pearl Harbor. A piece of the ship had even washed up on a beach where this colonel had found it. One of the stickers had the ship's name on it. I asked more questions about this part of the family I had never met before, but Daniel started blocking my view, even looking over his shoulder to make sure I couldn't see the pieces and stickers, as if that would stop me from asking about Pearl Harbor and how it connected to our family. The colonel couldn't keep a shard of the ship, but he was allowed to keep a picture of it, which I saw years later. Daniel wasn't very clever. When he realized I wasn't going to give up, he turned around and tried to hit me. Papa grabbed his arm, told him not to hit girls, and said I could sit beside him to watch the assembly process. I wasn't touching the pieces, paints, glue, or stickers. I just wanted to watch and soak up the history and trivia about the original ship and our family. Daniel had no interest in the history behind his models and resented that I was bonding with Grandpa over it. After we got back from Texas, Daniel brought his hand drill with him. He was told it wasn't for casual use and never to be used inside the house. But he ignored this and started drilling holes in the wooden fencing at our base housing to spy on neighbors. He quickly got in trouble for it. Once he realized he'd get punished if Mom caught him, he began drilling shallow quarter or half-inch holes in his furniture, hiding the modifications under toys and other items to delay discovery. After finishing with his room, he moved on to my furniture. I caught him lining up the drill over pencil marks he had made on top of my dresser. I yelled for our parents because he was using the drill inside the house. He got angry and swung the drill at my face, hitting me just above my good eye, the same side where I already had a scar from when he'd hit me with the end table. I went to the hospital again. My glasses saved me. They got gouged deeply and deflected the drill bit enough to hit my eyebrow instead. More bleeding and crying followed, and this time I needed stitches. After I got home from the hospital and they confirmed I wasn't blinded, Mom's only punishment for Daniel was to take away the drill and yell at him for damaging base housing. Dad dragged Daniel to Home Depot for spackle and paint, made him patch up every hole in the walls and baseboards, and grounded him for a month for hurting me. Daniel had to live with the damage he did to his own furniture since it was his fault. I wasn't even in 3rd grade yet. Elementary to middle school was full of me getting fresh scars because of Daniel's violent behavior, like the time he cut the tip off my finger, lied to avoid doing his fair share of chores, stole and broke my glasses, hid my things, then blamed me until I got punished, only for those things to miraculously reappear and I got rewarded. He learned how to brown nose and suck up to Mom, embarrassing me publicly. His punishments were always lighter, with items only taken away temporarily, while anything Mom disliked of mine was donated without my consent. He was even allowed to make his room smell like pee. He engineered moments where I would trip or hurt myself around the house, and convinced Mom that I was some kind of greedy cow who ate all the food. Because of that, I wasn't allowed to open anything in the kitchen that wasn't already open, so he could open my favorite cereal or snacks and gorge himself on more than half before anyone else got a chance. Yet somehow, I was always the one at fault, even if I followed the stupid new rule, because Daniel would never eat more than a share, unlike my fat blind ass. I caught him eating the green, blue, and purple Fruit Loops specifically from the cereal box to ensure he got the lion's share, and he tried to convince me it was a factory defect that our box was missing those colors. Dad and I caught him hiding bottles of coffee creamer in his room to drink like chocolate milk because he liked the taste, and Mom only grounded him for a week. Once, I caught him trying to steal fruit pies from the grocery store, and I got backhanded in public for trying to shame him about his new medicine. While Mom returned the pastries to the cashier, she wasn't going to lose the groceries over it. Yes, my brother was on new medication that increased his appetite, but instead of recognizing his bloating and increased food consumption as a side effect, Mom treated me, the scrawny kid I was, as a voracious black hole, trying to blame my little brother. It wasn't until the coffee creamer incident that the rule about me not being allowed to open boxes, bags, or bottles was finally lifted. But there was never any apology, not from Daniel for trying to paint me as the bad guy, and not from Mom, who treated me like a villain throughout the grounding and ever since. Daniel knew exactly how to get Mom's attention and retaliated in small ways she would defend, as long as he didn't curse. He was allowed to call me anything he wanted and insisted that I do all the little things to protect my vision, like wearing glasses and announcing if someone was coming at me from my blind side, as if those things were beneath him. He told me I was worthless and didn't matter to him or anyone else. After every doctor's appointment, vision test, or glasses prescription renewal, he would ramp up his foul language to make sure I knew how little I meant. Mom enrolled both of us in adolescent therapy and told me maybe the reason my brother was acting out was because he was jealous. Daniel was supposedly jealous of the attention I got from our parents because of my vision problems, as if we didn't both have to see doctors for ADHD. Those therapy sessions did nothing for me except make me feel blamed for resenting that every new electronic device that came into the house went straight to my brother before I might get one. They said his emotional stagnation, caused by his mental issues, made him lash out to get attention the only way he knew, and that I had to be the bigger person and not retaliate. I was prescribed sleep medication because every little noise in the house would wake me up, scared for my things. I was also given antidepressants since I showed signs of depression despite my young age, alongside meds for ADHD. What did Daniel have to be jealous of? That I got painful eye drops dropped into my eyes every few months? That I got teased for wearing glasses? If he hurt me so badly that I ended up rushed to the hospital, why did he resent me for having our parents' attention? That wasn't a small detail he didn't understand, he just thought the words sounded fancy. He was raised knowing better than to hit girls, but he regularly attacked me from my blind side and got away with it because Mom let him. Later, he stuck to being stubborn, which I was too, but only after I realized Mom was a terrible parent who mistreated me for not being a dumb parrot like Daniel. By middle school, I was maxed out on my antidepressant dosage appropriate for my height and weight. Daniel was also violent and aggressive about video games he had to win or else. We used to go to the rec center on base with Mom, trading her military ID for an hour of time on an N64, a computer, or other activities. We play games like Kirby, Smash Brothers, or Pokemon. My vision quickly became a problem. Too much movement or not enough contrast meant I couldn't see my character. I'd stop touching the controller to try to find them. In Smash, Daniel would always pick characters that blended into the stage and move the camera so I couldn't react, then punt me off the stage repeatedly. I started refusing to play, which made him cry to Mom that I was being selfish. So we switched to the Pokemon game, since we had to learn, share, and play together. Daniel ignored my questions about the Pokemon, what each one did, why they were different, what what types meant, and why we had to pick 6. I picked Pokemon I liked and got wiped out. Then I noticed he kept swapping out his team when one of mine came out, so I copied him. I didn't realize I could actually see this game clearly, but he deliberately kept me in the dark about the mechanics so he could get cheap wins and brag about them like they mattered outside the game. With the Pokemon show and TCG being all the rage, I had to ask other kids at school and in the neighborhood for info. Eventually, I developed a strategy to crush my brother's team, mainly relying on Chansey as a damage sponge, and knowing that Hitmonlee was the only real counter to it. Silly Daniel got angry when he realized I had caught on to his tricks. He lied about agreeing not to use his pink tank and tried to hit me every time I chose my counter to his nonsense. When that failed, he pretended he wasn't going to use the pink tank and switched it out just to win again. But I quickly saw through this tactic, and it stopped working, which made him even more upset. The mama's boy ran to mommy, crying that I wasn't playing fair. She watched us play, where he never actually picked his tank, though he hovered over it, while I hovered over the kickboxer. If he wanted to play a dumb game in front of Mom, I was going to embarrass him by being the winner. Mom saw nothing wrong, and was happy I wasn't complaining about playing with my brother. This Cold War continued until I got Dad involved at the rec center. I taught Dad how to beat the pink tank when Daniel slipped it in sideways. Dad thought it was fun and said I was a great teacher. After that, Daniel refused to play with me anymore. The same thing happened when we got a PS2 and played Digimon Rumble Arena. I learned Gatomon was powerful, and Saramon was Daniel's cheap go-to. He ruined our time together again. All I wanted was to play my Neopets at the rec center, not fight with my brother. We didn't get the PS2 until middle school, and it was a Christmas gift for Daniel. We were supposed to share the console, games, controllers, and memory cards. In theory, that was fine if he wasn't so obsessed with Wii and power trips. Even though it was his gift, Mom kept the console in the living room. I initially had to ask Daniel's permission to play, which he never gave. I kept asking Mom every day for permission to play, and she kept sending me back to Daniel, who then threw a tantrum because I had gone over his head. Back then, games had only a few save files, and I made sure to use different ones so I wouldn't erase his progress. Eventually, I had to use the last save slot, which he claimed was for accidental deletions, but it would send me back to square one almost daily. I tried telling Mom, but she dismissed it, saying I'd get better with practice and that Daniel didn't mean it. I watched him scan the save files on the memory card for any that weren't his, then delete or overwrite mine. He'd say I wasn't allowed to play until he finished a hard section that required wiping every save slot. I wasn't allowed to use that excuse to protect my save file, and got backhanded by Mom whenever I tried. After repeatedly being set back by Daniel, I finally had enough. We went to the Navy exchange, and I got a yellow memory card that couldn't be confused with Daniel's red one. I used my card to protect my progress. Knowing Daniel wouldn't like losing this control, I kept my memory card with me at all times, fearing he'd come after it. Just a week and a half after gaining this freedom, Daniel ripped through my room while Mom was out at the commissary, searching for my card. Once again, I caught him, and we ended up fighting right in the middle of my room. Dad broke it up and put us both in timeout until Mom got home. Mom didn't understand why we were still arguing over save files when I already had my own memory card. Daniel then spun a tall tale about having maxed out his memory card and needing to use mine to keep playing one of his games. If it weren't for Dad, Mom would have swallowed that rotten sack of lies like it was the last bag of chocolate on earth and forced me to hand over my card. Dad pointed out that we had fewer than 10 games and each had a 16 gigabytes memory card, so it was physically impossible for Daniel to have filled his completely, even if he used every save slot in every game. When pressed, it turned out Daniel had plenty of room left on his card, and he got off scot-free while I was grounded for starting a fight with my brother in my own bedroom. Thanks, Mom. Here's why I have issues with food and cooking. Thanks, Mom. A commenter dug through my posts to shame me for mentioning an incident when my entitled mother stole food. They argued that parents do what they do out of love, and that I have no right to not appreciate everything they do. So, let's debunk this and shed light on the food stealing, now that I have some additional insights from my dad. Ever since I was little, Mom was aggressive about food. She's always been difficult, and would make dinner for my brother and me, then send us off to bed. We lived in Illinois near the Naval Academy, far enough away that Dad would come home after Mom had put us down for the night. As a kid, I assumed parents were fair and kind, and that Mom saved dinner for Dad. She didn't. She forbade him from cooking after he got home, because it would wake us up. My dad, a young man in his 20s at the time, could only manage a teacup of salsa and a bowl of tortilla chips for dinner. His equally young wife, who smoked a pack a week to stay thin and was vegan, then was being cruel, and I didn't realize that his breakfast consisted of just coffee and a few rice cakes. Lunch was ramen, a Coke, and a Nutter Butter. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I found the chocolate treat, but Dad got mad when I took it. I didn't understand back then, but now I feel awful because that was his second highest calorie intake. Weekday dinners were just chips and salsa or nothing, and weekends meant he got to eat with us. He ate well only because he stuck with my brother and me, trying not to starve. This was supposedly around the time the Berlin Wall fell. Despite Mom's tales about how awful Dad was for making noise in the kitchen after bedtime, or any other excuses, once we moved to California for Dad's new duty station, he was closer to base housing and could come home for dinner. But he kept the chips and salsa habit. As my brother and I got older and developed the usual appetites of growing kids, Mom tried to limit what we ate. She insisted we shouldn't finish snacks faster than some arbitrary time and tried to enforce a rule restricting us to a fair share of snacks. There was a lot of pushback because my brother's OCD meant he would keep hoarding food unless someone was personally watching him, but if he was watched, he'd throw a fit. So, I had to get to the food first to secure my share. Mom wasn't happy that her rules were causing food aggression between us, so her solution was that any kid she caught eating an unauthorized snack or more than the approved amount had to stand in the middle of the kitchen and hold out their hand to receive a slap from a fly swatter soaked in water. If you pulled your hand back, she'd hit your face with the second swing. This didn't stop the food aggression, and my brother was often let off because of his condition. We both cheered every time she snapped the wet fly swatter because it meant we wouldn't get hit in the face. I got curious why Mom made key lime pie from scratch instead of buying it at the commissary. She said, "Okay, let's do both and you'll see." So I helped make an icebox pie, feeling excited because that meant we'd have two pies to enjoy. We started with the pre-made pie, which was okay. We each had one piece and could have a second, so being good kids, we didn't think twice about having two pieces after dinner. A few days later, before taking a shower, I went to the fridge and decided to tell Mom I was going to have my second slice after my shower. Something made me warn my brother that his pie was in the fridge and that if he had his today, we could have the new homemade pie tomorrow. After my shower, I went looking for my pie and it was gone. I found Mom in the kitchen, poking the last bite of my pie into her mouth while Dad also had a slice and my brother's slice was gone. I felt so betrayed and told Daniel, who threw an intense OCD fit. Dad said he didn't know it was our pie and asked Mom why she didn't tell him about the second, homemade pie. That didn't go any better. Still being the innocent second grader I was, I thought Mom would make up for it with the next pie and resolved not to trust anyone with my pie again. When I mentioned that the fair share rule meant she had to give us the pie she stole by giving us each an extra slice, Mom laughed and sent me away. "Okay, fine," she said. "Kids shouldn't have 3/4 of a pie between them." But I sure wasn't going to leave my pie in the fridge and lose it to that goat-faced excuse of a mother again. So, I kept trying to get my pie every night after dinner and was denied each time by Mom. Daniel was pissed too and pleaded with Mom for his slice, but was denied as well. His brilliant idea, about a week later, was to sneak out of his bedroom in the dead of night, sneak into the kitchen, and eat it. He could have gotten away with it if he hadn't made noise getting a fork. Daniel managed to eat half of his second slice before Mom found him. So, she threw out his pie right in front of him and did the same to mine, even though I only tried once a day and never sneaked into the kitchen at midnight like my brother did. I curled up in fear, hearing the heavy smacks of Mom spanking him in the middle of the kitchen, and I couldn't understand why he thought sneaking food would work. I was too scared to even get out of bed to pee when I had to, afraid I'd get slapped for waking her up. We already had food aggression over getting our share, but now we were breaking into snacks faster, so our portions couldn't be taken before we got to them. Mom snapped the wet fly swatter at us many times after this, but we never stopped. She stole our dessert twice, among many other kids' foods. By then, we weren't losing anything else. Around this time, my brother's new medication caused a huge increase in his appetite, and he started ballooning in size, stealing food to satisfy the cravings the meds caused. His starvation-fueled greed erased any sense of fair share for him. My own food aggression worsened because I knew anything I liked would end up in his sneaky black holes. No joke, he opened a new box of Fruit Loops, sorted through it, and ate only the blue, green, and purple ones, consuming over half the box. When I called him out, he tried to convince me all Fruit Loops came like that. He also got into cans of olives, stole entire bottles of coffee creamer to hide in his room and drink like chocolate milk, and demolished boxes of Hot Pockets with zero consequences. Worse still, he'd eat straight from the ice cream containers with a spoon, licking it clean between every bite. I caught him doing this nasty habit and tattled. Every time he got yelled at, but rarely hit, and I was sent away to my room. Then Daniel got clever and focused on eating every sweet treat I liked. At first, I thought he was just being petty to deny me snacks, but the real truth hit me like a freight train. Daniel blamed me for the missing sweets since I was known for having a sweet tooth. Every time I tried to point the blame where it belonged, with or without proof, I got hit. Meanwhile, my brother only got lectured and was rarely punished. I was backhanded so much that I convinced myself crying was a weakness, and that if I stopped crying, Mom would stop hitting me. I had a cheap Talk Girl Walkman, and in 6th grade, I recorded my brother admitting fault for his overeating and intent to blame me, but it didn't make a difference to Mom. Dad made sure Daniel got punished, and my brother even tried to steal the recorder, which could only hold a single 30-second message. I always told Dad, so Daniel got punished and I got my stuff back. Once my brother's medication was adjusted, Mom decided manners were the next thing to fix, right after my farting problem. We got this from Dad, who ate like a sailor fast and with no table manners. Now that my brother wasn't starving and was at a healthy weight, Mom heavily controlled our food again. She wanted us to learn table etiquette, but what we actually learned was something quite different. Her method for correcting us was brutal. If any part of you that wasn't supposed to be on the table touched it, she'd jab it hard with her fork enough to hurt, but not enough to bruise. If you ate with your mouth open or didn't chew enough, she'd reach over and smack you in the mouth. If your napkin fell from your lap, she'd stab your wrist with the fork, whether you were about to eat or not, then point to the floor. If you didn't pay her attention or she got tired of stabbing you, you simply didn't eat for the rest of the night. If she took your food for any reason, that was it, you were done eating that night. And if you looked like you might finish dinner before her, you were stuck cleaning the entire kitchen alone. The kid who finished their plate first had to clean the stove and oven too. Dad objected to her extreme behavior, but she ignored him. She was way faster at stabbing than he was at stopping her, unless he physically restrained her. Honestly, things only got better when she wasn't at the table. Mom refused to stop stabbing us, even when Dad warned her about the negative effect it was having on our behavior, not just at dinner, but overall. Daniel's outbursts worsened since she started this motivational tactic. By the 3rd day, my brother jabbed her back hard enough to break skin, but quickly realized it wasn't worth it after a long 10-minute spanking. Then Mom decided that since we had been gassing so much, we had to chew each bite 250 times before swallowing or taking another bite. She enforced this by taking our plates away right before we could eat. I don't remember what happened to the food after that, but it never reappeared, and we went to bed hungry. She even tried to take Dad's plate once, but he gave her a cold look and pushed her hand away with the back of his fork before taking his plate to eat in the living room. Around this time, bullies at school started stealing my lunch, so I couldn't eat after recess. With snacks tightly controlled at home, I barely managed to ease my hunger before dinner, which became a war zone full of tension. This detail will become important later. I realized after about 50 chews, the mush on my tongue felt the same as after 150, and by 250 chews, it was just downright gross. So, I began chewing less to avoid that awful feeling. My brother's OCD kicked in, and he started snitching on me, which got me sent to bed without dinner for a week, plus a 7-minute spanking for breaking the plate, because I barely made it to 100 chews. My brother claimed I was trying to get an extra bite, so I started shoveling food fast because I was starving. This turned into a standoff where we stared each other down, waiting to snitch. The snitch only got a hit on the head, and the one being snitched on got sent away from the table. The prize for snitching? Not having to do the dishes. I think Dad caught on to something going on at school because during that week of constant snitching, his chips and salsa habit became my saving grace. He always had it after dinner, and while I lay curled up in bed trying not to think about food, he quietly put some chips and salsa on the corner of my dresser. I ate it terrified of being caught, as quietly as a mouse. I left the plate there for him to pick up after about 10 minutes. Looking back now, I'm so grateful, especially knowing why he always did that. Mom starved him too. Fed up with having my lunches stolen at school and no adult stepping in to stop it, I came up with a plan. I put my Tupperware on the table and told the other kids that for a few pennies, I'd eat whatever food they put in it, and if I puked, I'd pay them double. My parents are Texans, so even as a 4th grader, I had a strong stomach. This plan stopped me from going home starving and earned me no more than $1.50 a week, basically my allowance. When the teachers noticed my new, gross habit, they questioned me. I told them I wasn't allowed to eat dinner and that bullies were either stealing my lunch or pooping in my lunchbox. The bullies got disciplined by the school, and that's when I learned about CPS. We started family and individual counseling, and that was the end of the stabbing, chewing, and going to bed hungry phase of my life. The final blow came when we showed the caseworker our hidden food stashes. I hid mine in the small gap between my dresser drawers. Daniel kept his between his box spring and mattress. I had baggies of goldfish crackers, Lay's potato chips, and some rotten fruit in a Ziploc. Daniel's stash was flaming hot Cheetos and coffee creamer. He kept the creamer in his dirty clothes hamper until laundry day. It was smart to have a drink after that. The caseworker just shot us 9 comments about our food, weight, and eating habits, but Mom went back to enforcing the fair share rule at least until college. Mom once complained to her couple's therapist that she was the only one who did all the cooking and cleaning in the house, and that she was tired. Rightfully so. The therapist suggested dividing chores, and we all agreed to share cooking responsibilities a few times a week. Especially my brother and me, since we'd need to fend for ourselves once we moved out. On the surface, this sounded good, and it gave me something to complain about, because if I was moving out someday, I wasn't going to be able to afford fancy things like New York strip steak or curry paste from specialty stores. The rule was that each of us would cook one dinner a week, same as my brother. I used to cook midweek, but once college started, I ended up cooking earlier in the week while Daniel cooked on Saturdays. Mom decided she wanted real recipes and forced me to plan meals like chicken cordon bleu, French onion soup, and stuffed manicotti dishes no college student from a middle-class family with no scholarships and crushing student loans could regularly afford. She was also tired that the only 2 good meals she got to eat without lifting a finger were on weekends, so she tried to force me to cook during the week when I had a heavy course load. I pushed back, refusing to cook before Thursday, so she still got her 2 meals back-to-back, just earlier in the week. She kept complaining, but I wouldn't budge because of my coursework, while Daniel just stayed in his room playing WoW. I can definitely cook now, but the act itself stresses me out because it's tied to memories of micromanagement from a backseat cook who caused me trauma and a deep, instinctive flinch. I hated being yelled at for not having exactly the right ingredients, being pressured to cook at times I didn't want to, and being criticized when things didn't turn out perfectly. Isn't my mom just a peach? My entitled mom would rather total her car than listen to me. Sorry if this isn't exactly the right place for this story, but it's about where I think things went wrong because my mom is seriously entitled. This time, she decided her wants and needs were more important than the lives of everyone in the car with her. This happened back in the early 2000s, not recent, but after reconnecting with some old friends, I saw a news report that reminded me of this story about my entitled mother. She once put her life, mine, and our dogs in danger because she thought she knew how to handle a dangerous intersection better than anyone else, including her teenage daughter me, who was medically unable to drive. This all took place in Southern California, which should give you an idea of the level of driving around there. To set the scene, I will never drive, but that didn't mean I was unaware of the rules of the road or clueless about human nature when it comes to entitlement. It wasn't because I wanted to drive someday, but because I needed to protect myself as a pedestrian from careless drivers' cars, trucks, motorcycles, you name it. If I was going to be involved in an accident, I wanted to be right in the eyes of the law, so I'd have options if I survived. That strategy actually paid off once during high school with a $10,000 settlement, but I definitely didn't want to get rich that way. I can draw a picture of this intersection if needed, but I'll try to describe it clearly. Imagine a main road that's at least 4 lanes wide at its narrowest point, running between several interstates. You have to drive defensively here to avoid accidents because not all drivers are careful. This particular intersection had a steep hill on its west end, so steep that large vehicles had to floor the gas to get up it. By the time you crested the hill and saw the intersection, you basically had to be in the lane you wanted because there was hardly any time before reaching the light. At that point, you either maintained your speed or slammed on the brakes. On our side of the street, there were 5 lanes, a protected left turn lane allowing a U-turn separated by a solid white line, which was about 6 cars deep, a left turn lane, 2 straight lanes, and a protected right turn lane. The opposite side had 4 lanes. This intersection was often in the news several times a month due to crashes caused by drivers going up that hill who weren't prepared for what awaited at the top. The southwest corner had a high school directly across from a fast food restaurant, and between these two was a small T intersection. This tiny T allowed drivers to safely enter the right turn lanes without risking collision with drivers coming up the hill to get into the other 3 lanes. But if you were stubborn or reckless like my mom, who had a very loose interpretation of the rules, you could cut across all the lanes of traffic, merge into the cars coming up the hill, and then turn into the protected U-turn lane. That made me nervous even during the day because you really can't see who's at the top of the hill until you're right there. Strangely, Mom seemed to respect that little white line more than the safety of herself and everyone in the car. One evening, I was doing some activities after school at the high school when Mom came to pick me up in her silver Subaru Legacy with our little terrier along for the ride. The sun had long set, there was no moon, and the stars were hidden behind a thick marine layer. As I got in and we left the school, I noticed Mom staring down the dark hill, trying to spot any headlights coming up. I asked her to just go around the fast food place and approach the intersection from the south. It was safer that way. The south intersection was the route the school buses took, so the turns weren't blocked by anything, and it was better lit than the way Mom planned to go. "I know what I'm doing," she snapped, clearly annoyed that I questioned her. I settled back, dog in my lap, watching as my all-knowing mom turned into the T intersection and began cutting across traffic lanes to reach the protected turning lane. Suddenly, the car jerked violently sideways. The seat belts locked, the dog slid into the passenger window, then thumped down onto the floor. Instead of heading into the dark downhill, I saw red lights change to green in front of us. Thankfully, the airbags didn't deploy. It turned out a black sedan with dealer plates had raced up the hill with no headlights on, aiming for the unprotected turning lane, and had no time to stop. The sedan slammed into Mom's Subaru right at the front driver's sidewheel well, hitting the front right corner. Both cars limped into the fast food parking lot to exchange info. The other driver, a young woman who barely looked old enough to drink, got out of her Nissan to face Mom's mega car. I felt bad for her afterward, but at the time, I was more worried about our 14-pound dog, checking if she was hurt. She was fine. Later, when Mom filed a claim with her insurance, they declared her Subaru a total loss. The other car wasn't much better off, both had warped frames. The Subaru was only about 4 years old, in great shape with regular maintenance. Now wrecked because Mom thought she had night vision or something and refused to take the safer, longer route. The worst outcome if she had just listened to me would have been arriving home 5 minutes later. Instead, she rolled the dice with everyone's lives even though there had been countless close calls at that intersection, even during the day. I always felt anxious and nauseous when she pulled this stunt, and all she ever did was complain about other drivers. Mom eventually got a new silver Subaru, though she was less happy with it. She kept making that dangerous turn downhill and wasn't thrilled that Dad and I didn't back her up on whose fault the accident was. By the way, Dad always took that intersection from the south. When he had to drive home down the hill, he liked his truck and knew better than to tempt fate with local drivers and their risky turns and braking. Even now, the memories of those years and the constant pressure from Mom still haunt me. Cooking can trigger anxiety, and I flinch whenever someone criticizes my efforts. The driving accident still makes me uneasy around cars, especially at that intersection. But things are a little better. Therapy helped me find ways to cope, and I'm learning to set boundaries with Mom, even if it's hard. I'm still working through the scars, but I'm hopeful. Each small step toward healing feels like reclaiming a part of myself that was lost for too long. The road ahead isn't easy, but I'm not as lost as I once was. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.